Chapter 61, Prelude to Paired Evaluation 2. After the day wound down, I made my way to Professor Nero's office. The corridors of Mythos Academy were still bustling with late-night energy students cramming for exams, cadets running simulations in the VR rooms, and drones humming overhead, running maintenance on the Academy's high-tech infrastructure. I stopped in front of the magnetic sliding door and knocked lightly. It hissed open without a sound. "Come in, Arthur," Nero's voice greeted me from inside. I stepped through, the door ceiling shut behind me with a quiet thud. The office was minimalist in design, sleek glass walls, floating holographic screens displaying various reports, and a single metallic desk that seemed to adjust itself based on Nero's posture. He sat behind it, his usual unreadable expression in place. "Take a seat," he gestured to the chair across from him. I did, sitting up straight as his sharp gaze flickered over me, no doubt already running a silent assessment in his head. "You reported you unlocked your gift over the fall break," he began, cutting straight to the point. "Describe it for me in detail." I nodded, having already prepared for this. "Yes, Professor, my gift is called Lucent Harmony. It grants me affinity with all 11 elements of mana, even those I naturally lack. I can also cast a limited number of 5-circle spells through spell weaving. Finally, it enhances my ability to control ambient mana with extreme precision, which increases my overall effectiveness in combat." Nero tapped a few commands into his desk, a data file opening in midair, likely my student profile being updated in real time. He studied my words carefully before nodding. He mused, fingers steepling together. "A multi-elemental gift, limited 5-circle casting, and fine-tuned control over ambient mana. This is an incredibly versatile ability, Arthur." He paused before adding, "and a dangerous one." I raised an eyebrow. Dangerous? "Because versatility, when mastered, can turn into unpredictability," he said simply. "That is something neither your allies nor your enemies will ever be fully prepared for." I absorbed his words, letting them settle. He wasn't wrong. The ability to adapt to any situation using multiple elements, combined with precise mana manipulation, made me difficult to read. "Since you've also reached high silver rank, I need to adjust the assignment I originally intended for you and Serafina," he continued. I nodded, waiting for him to elaborate. "Given that you now have access to 5-circle magic even if limit a dime recommending that you be placed in Spellcasting 3, your previous assignment already showcased perfect use of mana weaving. At this rate, it would be a waste not to hone your spellcasting further." A small flash of satisfaction sparked in me. Spellcasting 3 was a class reserved for white-rank students or anomalies like me. Even Rachel, with her prodigious magic talent, had not entered it yet. "Your progress has been exceptional," Arthur, Nero said, his tone firm. "Continue to work hard." I stood, offering him a slight nod. "Thank you, Professor." He didn't reply, already turning his attention back to the floating screens in front of him. Taking that as my cue, I exited the office, the door whispering shut behind me. As I walked down the corridor, I felt Luna's presence stir within my mind. "Spellcasting 3, she mused, her voice a serene hum in my thoughts. 5-circle magic will serve you well. Do I really need it, though?" I questioned, adjusting my jacket as I stepped into the Academy's main atrium. It was quieter now, the evening rush settling into scattered conversations and dimmed neon signs. "Yes," Luna answered with certainty. "My magic as a Killen follows different laws from human spellcraft. While it grants you greater control, it does not inherently complement structured spellcasting. Mastering human magic will only make you stronger." That made sense. Luna's power was instinctual, raw, woven into the very essence of nature. Human magic, in contrast, was calculated, structured through formulas and theoretical frameworks. The more I understood both, the more I could refine my abilities. "Understood," I replied. As I exited the main building, heading toward the student hub, I sent a quick message through my neural interface. "Arthur, you at the usual place." Rose, yep, thought you forgot about me. I chuckled to myself. I hadn't seen Rose yet since coming back from the northern continent. Time to change that. Underscore. The cafe was one of those cozy, tucked away spots that managed to be both futuristic and timeless. Holographic menus floated over every table, displaying shifting images of coffee, desserts, and every possible customization a caffeine addict could dream of. The air smelled of roasted beans and something faintly sweet, maybe vanilla or caramel. It had been 9 days since I last saw Rose, which was strange considering how often we used to meet. Between the trip to the northern continent, the chaos at the Isle of Esherbreeze, and then returning straight into the madness of the academy, I hadn't even had time to check in with her properly. She was already seated when I walked in, a steaming cup in front of her. She looked up as I approached, her eyes narrowing just slightly before she leaned back in her seat. Well, Rose drawled, tapping her spoon against the edge of her cup. Look who finally remembered I exist. I sighed, sliding into the seat across from her. Nice to see you too, Rose. She tilted her head, studying me with an unreadable expression before huffing out a soft laugh. You look like hell. Thanks, I said dryly, flagging down a passing drone server. I've been busy. Yeah, no kidding, she muttered. I heard you nearly got yourself eaten by a 6-star beast. The drone chirped as I placed my order, just a simple coffee, no frills. I turned back to her, not eaten, just strategically outmatched. Rose arched a brow. Strategically outmatched? I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. Fine. I ran for my life while other people handled it. Her lips twitched, but she didn't push. And here I thought you liked keeping a low profile. First, you come back from the island survival as rank 1, then you somehow outmaneuver an entire year's worth of second years in the VR war. Now you're off fighting 6-star monsters and coming back with, she gestured vaguely at me, a gift. I met her gaze, surprised. You heard about that. She snorted, please. The moment you stepped back onto campus, people started talking. It's not every day someone suddenly unlocks their gift mid-semester. So what is it? Lucent Harmony, I admitted, leaning back as my coffee arrived. It lets me use all elements, control ambient mana, and cast limited 5-circle spells. She whistled, not bad. And here I thought you were going to be stuck as that guy with decent aura control. Glad to exceed your expectations, I said, taking a sip. The bitterness was grounding, a welcome contrast to the sheer unpredictability of the past few weeks. Rose rested her chin on her hand, watching me with an expression that was a mix of curiosity and mild exasperation. So, are you ever going to tell me why you didn't send so much as a single message for 9 days? Or do I have to guess? Guilt pricked at me, but I shrugged. It wasn't intentional. I barely had time to think between all the missions and training. And when I got back, things just kept piling up. She said, unimpressed. You know, normal people at least check in when they go off risking their lives against overgrown lizards. I set my cup down. You worried about me? She rolled her eyes. I was curious. There's a difference. I smirked. Sure. She clicked her tongue, but there was no real heat behind it. So, how's the next disaster looking? I raised a brow. What makes you think there's a next disaster? Rose gave me a flat look. Arthur, you attract chaos like a black hole. I'd be more surprised if things were finally normal. She wasn't wrong. I sighed, paired evaluation. They're having us fight 6-star beasts in teams to test synergy. Of course they are, Rose muttered, stirring her drink. And let me guess you got paired with someone who makes things extra complicated. Seraphita Zenith. Rose blinked, then let out a soft laugh, the Ice Queen herself. Wow, good luck. I snorted. She's not that bad. Oh, sure, she's not bad. She's just ... difficult. I thought about Seraphine's blank expression, her detached way of interacting with the world. She wasn't difficult in the way Cecilia or Ren were. She wasn't openly hostile or dismissive. But she had an air of untouchability, a quiet indifference that made it hard to tell what she was actually thinking. "It'll be fine," I said. Rose didn't look convinced. "You know, if you keep saying that every time you're thrown into a mess, I might start believing you actually enjoy this stuff." I chuckled. "I enjoy winning. And yet, you still suck at keeping in touch." I raised my hands in surrender. All right. I'll make sure to send a message next time I go off fighting nightmare creatures happy." She smirked extremely. We lapsed into a comfortable silence after that, the kind that came from knowing each other long enough that words weren't always necessary. The last 9 days had been a whirlwind, and sitting here, drinking coffee with Rose, felt like the first moment of normalcy I'd had in a while. Chapter 62, Prelude to Paired Evaluation 3. The class schedule had been tweaked. Theory classes were cut down in favor of practical training, a clear sign of how seriously the academy took the paired evaluation. And like the previous 2 evaluations, this one wasn't about individual performance, it was about teamwork. Or in some cases, the glaring lack of it. "Your opponents for this evaluation will be 6 star beasts," Nero announced, his voice carrying the same casual tone one might use when discussing the lunch menu. That sentence alone was enough to send a ripple of unease through the class. 6 star beasts. Not the kind of opponent you could brute force unless you had numbers on your side and the right numbers at that. Even the abyssal tide serpent I had helped evolve was only on the lower end of the 6 star spectrum, and it had still required multiple adventurers, Rachel and myself working together just to buy time. These would be stronger. Rachel raised a hand, her expression unreadable, but her tone firm. "Isn't that a little much?" I agreed with her. If Nero had told us we'd be fighting 5 star beasts, that would have been a difficult but reasonable challenge, but 6 star. Even if Lucifer was paired with someone else, there wasn't a single duo in Classic capable of taking one down outright. "The point isn't to win," Nero said, as if he had anticipated the concern. "It's to be effective." The biggest issue noted during the VR mock war wasn't individual skill but synergy, or, more accurately, the complete lack of it. This evaluation is designed to address that. You won't be graded on victory, but on how well you function as a team. That made sense. It also meant failure was an inevitability. A fair number of students still looked uneasy, but at least they weren't arguing anymore. "Now then," Nero continued, tapping on his wristband to activate the randomized matchups. "First up, Rachel Creighton and Cecilia Slate-Mark." The moment the names were spoken, an entirely different kind of tension filled the room. Rachel, to her credit, didn't react outwardly. She simply sighed through her nose and stood up. Cecilia, on the other hand, let out a delighted hum as she stretched. "Oh, this is going to be fun." Rachel shot her a sidelong glance. "You don't even like me." "Exactly," Cecilia said, flashing a grin that was pure mischief. "Which means I get to make this painful for you." Before Rachel could retort, Nero cut in. "You'll be facing a glacial hydra. Keep in mind that your only goal is to demonstrate effective teamwork. Anything less than that, and I'll consider it a failure." Rachel exhaled, schooling her expression into something neutral. She knew there was no arguing this. The only option was to get it over with. "Cecilia." She just smiled like a cat about to toy with a particularly annoying bird. The battle arena was a simulated one, a massive training ground that could shift terrains to accommodate different opponents. As Nero activated the settings, the environment changed, snow-covered ground stretching in all directions, jagged ice formations forming a natural maze. And then the beast arrived. The glacial hydra. It towered over them, a massive serpentine body covered in ice-encrusted scales, 3 heads swaying in eerie synchronization. Its breath clouded the air, freezing mist rolling across the battlefield in slow, creeping waves. Rachel and Cecilia both moved at the same time. That was the problem. Rachel darted to the side, activating her gift. Golden wings of light burst into existence behind her, amplifying her speed as she conjured barriers to block the incoming frost breath. She immediately began firing controlled light spells, aiming for the Hydra's eyes to blind it. At the exact same moment, Cecilia raised a hand, a wicked smirk on her lips. The very air around her turned crimson, the sheer density of her mana warping the space as she wove together an intricate spell. Which was when Rachel's attack collided with it. The result was instant. The carefully crafted weave of Cecilia's spell shattered mid-cast, the backlash sending a violent ripple of mana outward. Rachel barely managed to stabilize herself midair, wings flickering under the unexpected feedback. Cecilia stumbled slightly before catching herself. Then she turned to Rachel with an unimpressed look. "Are you stupid?" she asked flatly. "Don't get in my way." Rachel bristled. "Maybe if you actually communicated instead of assuming you can do whatever you want." So now I need to communicate." Cecilia laughed, a sharp, amused sound. "Should I also hold your hand and ask if you're okay every 5 minutes, Your Highness?" Rachel clenched her jaw. "Just focus." "On what?" Cecilia shot back. "Helping you fumble your way through this." Meanwhile, the glacial Hydra watched. Then, as if realizing its opponents were too busy arguing to notice, it attacked. The ground erupted in a jagged explosion of ice, forcing both girls to break apart as massive frozen spears burst from the ground. The Hydra lunged, one head releasing a breath of freezing wind while another snapped its jaws toward Rachel. Rachel barely dodged, twisting midair, her wings propelling her upward. She conjured a golden barrier just in time to block the frost breath, but the impact sent her skidding back. Cecilia, on the other hand, retaliated with a fiery explosion that melted a section of the frozen ground but also caused another shockwave that nearly knocked Rachel off balance. "You're reckless," Rachel snapped. "And you're predictable," Cecilia shot back. The Hydra, once again, took advantage of their momentary distraction. A massive tail swung, the sheer force behind it enough to collapse one of the ice formations. Rachel managed to shield herself in time, but Cecilia had to teleport several meters back to avoid the full brunt of it. Nero sighed loudly from the observation platform, rubbing his temples. Rachel and Cecilia, despite both being incredibly talented in their own right, were proving to be the worst possible combination. It wasn't even a matter of skill. Their abilities should have complemented each other. Rachel's precision and control balancing out Cecilia's sheer overwhelming power. But they refused to cooperate. Rachel prioritized efficiency. Cecilia thrived in chaos. Rachel planned her movements carefully. Cecilia improvised and adapted in the moment. Rachel was structured. Cecilia was unpredictable. Their magic clashed as much as their personalities, leading to a battle that was not only ineffective but actively hindering them. And the glacial Hydra. It was having an excellent time. Rachel's light magic didn't mix well with Cecilia's crimson energy. Each time they tried to combine attacks, the spells interfered, disrupting their coordination. Their movements weren't synchronized, leaving glaring openings that the Hydra exploited without hesitation. Another burst of frost swept across the battlefield, forcing them both back again. Rachel grit her teeth. "We need to figure it out." "Yeah, maybe if you actually kept up." Cecilia cut in, flipping her hair as she lazily dodged another incoming strike. "I swear, if I wanted to fight solo, I'd at least pick a better opponent." Rachel's eye twitched. From the platform, Nero let out a long-suffering sigh. "All right, that's enough," he announced, his tone firm. "Stand down." The Hydra immediately froze literally. A pulse of mana from Nero rendered the beast immobile, locking it in place before it could continue taking advantage of the disaster unfolding before it. Rachel and Cecilia both turned toward the professor, breath slightly uneven from exertion. Nero looked at them for a long moment. Then he pinched the bridge of his nose. "I have seen bad teamwork before, but this is actively painful to watch." Cecilia smirked. Was it entertaining, though? Nero didn't even dignify that with an answer. Instead, he turned to Rachel. "You're methodical, but you're inflexible when things don't go as planned." Then to Cecilia. "And you? Well, you don't play well with others." Cecilia shrugged. "Not my fault others can't keep up." "Your grade for this evaluation is currently a failing one," Nero stated flatly. Rachel's mouth pressed into a thin line. Cecilia raised an eyebrow, mildly interested but otherwise unconcerned. You'll be required to redo this evaluation later, Nero continued, and if your teamwork isn't significantly better, expect to see a permanent drop in your rank. That, at least, wiped a smirk off Cecilia's face. Rachel exhaled, adjusting her posture. Understood, Professor. Cecilia rolled her eyes. Sure, sure. As they walked off the field, Rachel shot a glance at Cecilia. Next time, she said, voice cool. Try not to act like you're the only one here. Cecilia grinned. Next time, try not to get in my way. It was going to be a long semester. Chapter 63, Prelude to Paired Evaluation 4. Wow, those two are a disaster. Luna mused, her voice tinged with what could only be described as amused pity. I didn't need her commentary to confirm what was painfully obvious. Watching Rachel and Cecilia attempt teamwork was like watching two highly intelligent missiles collide midair loud, bright, and catastrophically inefficient. Their battle had started with the vague promise of coordination. It took exactly 30 seconds for that promise to collapse in spectacular fashion. Rachel's precise, calculated spell work clashed horrifically with Cecilia's instinct-driven, raw firepower approach. Every time one of them made a move, the other would unintentionally, sometimes intentionally counteract it. Their magic didn't harmonize so much as combust on contact. I winced as Rachel's golden light spell meant to provide a barrier was overwhelmed by Cecilia's crimson flames. The collision resulting in a blinding explosion that sent both of them skidding backwards. That was your fault, Rachel snapped, brushing dust from her uniform. Cecilia smirked, utterly unfazed. No? I thought you were supposed to be the saintess. Shouldn't you be able to adapt to mere mortal incompetence? The resulting golden flare from Rachel's staff suggested that if they hadn't been in an official evaluation, she might have actually smited Cecilia on the spot. The six-star beast they were meant to be fighting watched the exchange with what I could only describe as mild confusion before shrugging and lunging at them again. It was painful to watch. I don't think any duo will be worse than them, I muttered. It wasn't just an observation, it was common sense. Rachel and Cecilia did not mix. It didn't matter that both of them were spellcasting prodigies of the mind aspect. Their approaches were fundamentally opposed. When Nero finally sighed and called the match because neither girl was going to swallow their pride enough to actually work together, I almost felt bad. Almost. But the show wasn't over. Lucifer and Jin stepped forward next. I straightened, my full attention on the two. Lucifer Windward, the strongest first year, the one destined to be king, and Jin Ashbluff, the prince of necromancers. They stood side by side, eerily silent as the next six-star beast was released onto the battlefield. It was a massive, reptilian monstrosity, its obsidian-scaled hide glistening under the artificial combat lights. A beast known as the Dreadscale Devourer, 6-star. Heavy armor, resistant to most elemental magic. And Lucifer moved first. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion. Lucifer didn't hesitate. He never did. The moment the Dreadscale Devourer was released, he moved a blur of motion that defied expectation, a streak of silver cutting through the air. He covered the distance in an instant, his longsword flashing as it came down in a single, devastating arc. A normal strike from a swordsman. No, this was Myth of the Northern Peak, a grade 6 art belonging to the Windwards, the most powerful martial family of the northern continent, and Lucifer used it with terrifying ease. First movement Winter's ascent. His body disappeared from view, reappearing midair in a higher position as if stepping on an invisible platform. But it wasn't flight, it was a precise mana technique, using force to launch himself into the air without resistance. A technique that let him strike from angles no normal swordsman could. The Dreadscale barely had time to react before his sword descended not just with raw strength, but with the weight of an entire frozen mountain behind it. I surged along the blade, freezing the very air around him, reinforcing the strike's force. The impact sent shockwaves through the arena, cracking the Dreadscale's reinforced hide. Jin was already moving, exploiting the moment, his necromantic summons surging forth. But Lucifer wasn't done. The dread scale recovered, its massive bulk shifting to counter with a devastating tail swing. It came fast too fast for anyone to dodge on foot, but Lucifer wasn't on foot. Second movement Northern Gale. A flicker, a blur. Lucifer stepped midair again, twisting his body unnaturally, like the wind itself carried him. His sword followed, carving a crescent arc of frozen mana through the air, trailing ice and fire as it slammed into the beast's tail before it could fully connect. A perfectly executed counter. The tail was forced back, the beast recoiled, letting out a guttural snarl, its reptilian eyes flashing with fury. Lucifer landed lightly for someone who had just parried a strike from a monster twice his size. The entire battlefield shifted in response to his presence. The air felt colder, heavier. Jin capitalized immediately, his undead detonating around the beast's legs, forcing it to stagger. And Lucifer smiled. He was pushing back a 6-star beast with pure technique. Not magic, not tricks, just swordsmanship honed to the pinnacle of what humanity could achieve. And even then, it wasn't enough. The dread scale adapted. It twisted, using its own stagger as momentum, and its tail slammed into the ground with a force that shattered the terrain. The battlefield exploded. Lucifer barely managed to pivot midair, landing with a sharp skid, his sword gleaming with a thin layer of frost. Jin, however, wasn't so lucky. The shockwave tore through his formation, sending him sprawling, his summoned warriors disintegrating under the sheer pressure. Lucifer's grip on his sword tightened. He was ready to step forward, to continue the assault, to push himself even further. But Nira's voice cut through the battlefield. Enough! And just like that, it was over. Lucifer exhaled, standing down, his eyes still locked on the beast as it snarled, restrained by the Academy's safety protocols. I exhaled too, tension I hadn't even realized I'd been holding finally releasing. Even knowing how terrifying Lucifer was, seeing him up close was something else entirely. Wow, Luna muttered in my mind, that boy is truly ridiculous. I nodded, gripping my sword tighter. Lucifer Windward was ridiculous. And one day, I'd surpass him. Underscore? Ren cracked his knuckles, rolling his shoulders as the beast was released into the battlefield. The Titanfang Ravager emerged a massive, armored predator with reinforced plating that could withstand high-impact spells. Its body a fusion of organic muscle and mana-infused exoskeleton. A true 6-star monster, towering over them, radiating raw pressure. Ren barely looked at Ian. He didn't care. Fighting alone was all he needed. Void Fist first movement, collapsing step. The world lurched. In an instant, Ren vanished, not in a blur of speed, but in something more unnatural. His very presence contracted in on itself, like space was folding him forward, pulling him toward his target. 1 second he was standing at the starting line, the next, he was inside the Titanfang Ravager's guard. His fist struck out and space buckled. A shockwave didn't spread outward. Instead, the force collapsed inward, focusing all of its destructive impact into a single pinpoint impact on the Titanfang's armored plating. The beast reeled back, roaring in pain. Ian moved next, his expression composed but burning with a quiet, draconic intensity. He had no plans to sit back and let Ren handle everything alone. Legend of Prominence first movement, Blazing Dawn. His spear ignited, a controlled inferno spiraling along its length, the sheer heat warping the air around him. Ian didn't vanish like Ren, he surged forward like a comet, his body a streak of molten gold, his dragon blood roaring through his veins as he launched himself straight at the beast's exposed flank. The Ravager retaliated, its tail lashed toward him, a massive spiked battering rim. But Ian's movement didn't stop. He didn't need to dodge. His spear thrust forward, and in that instant, the fire didn't just burn. It devoured. The flames surrounding his spear ripped apart the incoming force, converting the kinetic energy into raw mana and feeding it back into Ian's strike. The spear slammed home, embedding itself between the Ravager's plated ribs, the shockwave blasting outward this time, sending embers scattering across the battlefield. Ren clicked his tongue. Ian had gotten in his way. Ren moved again. Void Fist's second movement. Event horizon. Time warped. The Titanfang's attempt to counter froze not completely, but slowed, its massive limbs struggling to complete their movements. The air around Ren shimmered, distorted, as if light itself was bending under the sheer pull of gravity. Then he struck. A straight punch, clean, precise, and infinitely heavier than it should have been. The Titanfang buckled under the impact, its own mass turning against it as the gravity in that single moment tripled, then quadrupled, locking it in place for a fraction of a second. A fraction was all Ren needed, but Ian was still moving. Legend of Prominence second movement, Infernal Ascent. His spear whipped upward, fire and mana exploding outward, turning the battlefield into a storm of gold and red. The ground beneath them cracked, the sheer force sending shockwaves up the Ravager's massive frame. But something was off. Ren wasn't coordinating. Ian's attack forced the Titanfang to stagger, but it also knocked it out of Ren's controlled gravity zone. Ren scowled as the beast's tail lashed out, freed from the force that should have locked it down for the final blow. Ian barely dodged in time, his spear blocking part of the impact, but the sheer weight of the strike sent him skidding backward, boots digging deep trenches into the ground. Ren cursed. Ian had disrupted his opening. Ian frowned. Ren wasn't adapting to him at all. They weren't a team. The Titanfang recovered. Then it counterattacked. A full-body slam, reinforced with raw mana, faster than anything they had seen before. And this time, neither of them were in position to stop it. Ren tried to activate Collapsing Step again, but he was off rhythm. Ian tried to redirect with Blazing Dawn, but the impact was already there. The Titanfang crashed into them. Both were sent flying. Ian twisted midair, his spear slamming into the ground to stop his momentum. Ren, however, was forced to absorb the impact raw, tumbling across the battlefield before skidding to a stop. Silence. Then Nero sighed. Enough. The fight was over. Ren gritted his teeth, pushing himself up, his frustration clear. Ian rose to his feet slower, his gaze locked on the Titanfang, but his expression unreadable. They had lost. Not because they weren't strong enough, but because they weren't a team. Chapter 64, Prelude to Paired Evaluation 5. The failures of the previous teams were expected. Lucifer and Jin had overwhelming individual strength, but their styles clashed too much. Lucifer, a relentless force, needed a partner who could match his tempo. Jin, a necromancer, fought methodically, wielding both his twin blades and the dead. They weren't actively working against each other, but neither were they fully in sync. They landed some solid hits but couldn't capitalize on them, allowing the 6-star beast to recover again and again. Ren and Ian were worse. Ren fought like he was the only one on the battlefield. Ian, disciplined and strategic, tried to cover him, but Ren refused to acknowledge him as an equal. It was a disjointed effort, two warriors with terrifying techniques, but no cohesion. Their defeat wasn't from a lack of skill but from sheer arrogance. And then there was Rachel and Cecilia. A disaster, an actual catastrophe of a pairing. It was impressive how bad they were together. Not only did they fail to coordinate, but they actively hindered each other, arguing mid-battle, their magic clashing, their spells disrupting each other's flow. If it hadn't been a training exercise, Nero might have had to intervene much earlier. 3 failures, 3 lessons in what not to do, which meant it was our turn. Serafina stood beside me, her expression neutral, her grip firm on her sword. Unlike the others, she wasn't concerned. She wasn't tense. She wasn't overthinking. She was simply ready. And I liked that. Nero called for the next match. The 6-star beast materialized in the arena. A Dreadhowl juggernaut. An apex predator of the wilds, standing at nearly 5 meters tall, with obsidian-colored fur and eyes that pulsed with a deep violet glow. A monster designed to take punishment and keep moving. its natural mana-infused hide making it highly resistant to physical and magical attacks. It was an endurance fighter, which meant we had to be faster. Serafina and I moved at the same time. She dashed forward, her blade unsheathing in a single motion, clean, precise, effortless. I followed, lightning flickering at my fingertips. The beast roared, the force shaking the arena, but we didn't hesitate. Serafina reached it first, disappearing in a flicker of movement. Not teleportation, pure footwork. Her blade moved like a falling petal in a storm, graceful yet lethal, flashing across the beast's thick hide. Sparks flew as her sword carved into its defenses, each movement flowing seamlessly into the next. Seven Blossoms blade our third form, whispering petals. She became a blur of steel and motion, never staying in one place long enough for the beast to retaliate. And then I was there. I activated Lucent Harmony, Luna's sigils appearing on my arms as I felt the rush of power. The superiority that came with having the power of a Qilin. I reached out, tapping into the raw energy around us, bending it to my will. The battlefield itself became my weapon. Lightning flickered from my hands, but I didn't just hurl a bolt, I shaped it. I pulled in stray mana, enhancing the spell, weaving it into something sharper. I didn't need brute force. I needed efficiency. The air crackled as I thrust my palm forward. Storm Pierce. A condensed spear of lightning shot through the air, striking the juggernaut right where Serafina had weakened its hide. The beast staggered not from the force alone, but from the sheer precision. The attack had burrowed into the exact spot with the lowest resistance. Serafina didn't waste the opening. Her footwork shifted. She stopped dodging. Her aura condensed. The very air around her shimmered. Her blade, once light and flowing, became absolute. Violet Mist Divine Art first movement, Violet Sunset Genesis. The shift was immediate. Before, she had been wind. Now, she was a storm. Her sword blurred, its edge wrapped in a deep violet glow, and she drove it straight into the juggernaut's chest. For the first time, the beast howled in genuine pain. I moved again. The beast retaliated, its massive claw swinging towards Serafina. I raised my arm, my mana surging. 5-circle spell, Etheric Bastion. A barrier materialized in an instant, an iridescent shield flickering with the combined energy of multiple elements. The claw crashed against it, force meeting force, but I had fine control over ambient mana. Instead of brute resistance, I redirected the energy, twisting the impact so that the claw slid off the barrier instead of breaking through it. Serafina spun away, her attack completed, her blade flicking to the side to shed the violet glow. The beast snarled, wounded but far from defeated. Its hide rippled, its mana surging as it adapted to our attacks. It was getting stronger. Keep moving. I called to Serafina. If we stop, it'll regenerate too fast. She didn't respond with words, just a sharp nod, already understanding. We moved together again. Serafina struck from the front. I struck from the sides. We used the battlefield, the gaps in each other's movements, the disruptions in the juggernaut's mana flow. We weren't just attacking it. We were breaking it down. Every strike, every spell, every movement, they all had a purpose. For the first time, the beast was forced on the defensive. It wasn't enough to kill it, not yet, but it was enough to matter. Enough that Nero actually smiled. After several minutes, he finally raised his hand, signaling the end of the match. The beast was teleported away. The arena fell silent. And then Nero spoke. Finally, someone actually understands teamwork. His voice carried across the field, unimpressed yet approving. He looked at Serafina first. Your technique is refined, your execution precise. But your greatest strength is adaptability. You worked within Arthur's rhythm and adjusted on the fly. That is what makes a warrior great, not just skill, but understanding. Serafina simply nodded. Then he turned to me. And you, Nero said, tilting his head slightly, as if assessing something deeper. You have something most people don't. You don't just fight alongside someone, you utilize them. He gestured to Serafina. You saw her strengths, You adjusted. You complimented her style instead of forcing her to adjust to yours. That is what made your teamwork superior. A pause. Then, with a glance at the rest of the class, he added, "Take notes." Lucifer looked vaguely interested. Ren scowled. Ian nodded, as if filing the information away. Rachel smiled. And Cecilia? Cecilia just grinned. I had no idea what that meant, but I had the sinking feeling I'd find out sooner rather than later. Your use of Lucid Harmony needs work. Luna's voice echoed in my mind, her usual serene tone laced with mild disapproval. How so? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. You use it sporadically, she explained. Lucid Harmony has divided itself into separate abilities in your mind. You're treating them like isolated tools when they should be functioning together as a single, fluid system. I absorbed her words, replaying my recent fights in my head. She wasn't wrong. I had managed to synchronize my abilities when I used a 5-circle god flash against the Abyssal Tide Serpent, layering my elemental affinity, spellcasting, and ambient mana control into one seamless strike. But that was more instinct than intention. My usual approach had me cycling through abilities instead of weaving them together as one cohesive force. So you're saying I need to stop thinking of them as separate skills and just act? Exactly, Luna said. The power is already there. You just need to stop overcomplicating it. I let out a slow breath. Easier said than done, but not impossible. Across the training ground, Nero clasped his hands behind his back, surveying us with that ever-present air of scrutiny. Now, all of you know what you need to improve before the paired evaluation, he announced. That will be held next Friday. You have 10 days to work on your coordination and ensure you don't humiliate yourselves again. That last part was clearly directed at two people in particular. Before you go, I'll be assigning grades based on today's performance, Nero continued, eyes settling on Rachel and Cecilia first. Rachel Creighton and Cecilia Slatemark, he said, voice exasperated. F. The worst teamwork I've ever seen in my life. Not only did you ignore each other, but you actively sabotaged one another. I've seen rivals cooperate better under threat of death, and yet the two of you, he pinched the bridge of his nose. Figure it out. Cecilia, of course, looked entirely unbothered. Rachel, on the other hand, shot her a glare that could have melted steel. Lucifer Windward and Jen Ashbluff, Nero continued, C+. Lucifer, you treated this as a one-on-one battle and expected Jin to keep up. He didn't. You didn't adjust, nor did you attempt to incorporate his fighting style into your own. Lucifer's expression remained unreadable, but Jin gave the faintest nod. It was rare to see him react at all, so I took that as something. Ian Vazirian and Ren Kagu, Nero moved on. B. Ian, you tried. Ren, you didn't. This was salvaged entirely by Ian's efforts to coordinate. Ren, I suggest you try remembering that a team battle is not a solo duel with extra background noise. Ren merely scoffed, crossing his arms. Ian sighed, clearly expecting this response. Then, finally, Nero turned to me and Serafina. Serafina Zenith and Arthur Nightingale. I felt Serafina glance at me, the faintest flicker of curiosity crossing her otherwise impassive face. Your teamwork was near perfect, Nero continued. You adapted to each other naturally, covered weaknesses, and didn't hesitate to shift strategies. The only reason this isn't an A+ is because, Arthur, his gaze locked onto mine, you were still holding back. Had you utilized all of your abilities, you would have had an easy A+. I clenched my fist slightly at his words. He was right. I had held back. Not because I lacked confidence, but because I still wasn't fully accustomed to using Lucid Harmony the way Luna described. If I could incorporate everything into a single, fluid style rather than treating each ability as a separate tool. I exhaled slowly. I had 10 days to figure it out. Chapter 65, Prelude to Paired Evaluation 6. Rachel didn't want to be here. Every rational part of her mind screamed at her to turn around, to let this disaster of a partnership collapse under its own weight. But the competitive part, the part that refused to let Cecilia win by dragging her down, kept her feet moving. She stopped in front of the door, exhaling slowly, as if she could release all her irritation along with her breath. Then she knocked and waited. The door slid open with a quiet hiss. Cecilia blinked at her for half a second before a slow, delighted grin spread across her face. "Oh, my Tilda," she drawled, placing a hand over her heart like she'd just been presented with a rare delicacy. "Ray Ray is visiting me. What an honor." Rachel stared at her, unamused. If looks could kill, Cecilia Slatemark would have been nothing but a memory by now. "Cecilia," Rachel exhaled through her nose, her grip on patience hanging by a thread. "We need to talk." "Oh," Cecilia leaned against the doorframe, feigning curiosity. "Is this about your undying admiration for me?" "I understand, Rachel, truly, but you must contain your—" Inside, Rachel pushed past her, stepping into the room without waiting for an invitation. Cecilia shut the door behind her, clearly entertained. Well, Ray Ray is being bold today." Rachel ignored her, scanning the room with mild surprise. It was neat and reasonably so. She had expected something chaotic, a reflection of Cecilia's unpredictable personality. Instead, the room was meticulously arranged, the furniture sleek and minimalistic, dark tones accentuated by soft golden light panels embedded into the walls. A subtle but undeniable regality lingered in the air, a reminder that no matter how unhinged Cecilia acted, she was still a princess. Rachel took a seat on the plush black sofa, crossing her legs as Cecilia sauntered over, perching herself on the opposite end with all the grace of a lounging cat. "So, Your Holiness," Cecilia purred, stretching her arms over the back of the couch, "to what do I owe this wonderful pleasure?" Rachel pressed her fingers against her temple. "We need to work together, Cecilia. The paired evaluation is going to tank our rankings if we don't." Cecilia waved a dismissive hand, and Rachel repeated, incredulous, "We'll get ranked down." Cecilia made a noise somewhere between a scoff and a yawn. "Oh, Ray Ray, it's adorable how you care about these things. Even if we fail, we're not getting kicked out of Class A," she stretched, arching her back slightly before grinning lazily. "We aced the first two evaluations, we'll ace the midterms, and you're, what, Miss Perfect scores in theory. You're fine." "The theory exams don't affect rankings," Rachel reminded her through gritted teeth. Details, Cecilia waved her off. "Anyway, I don't want to, so I won't." Rachel inhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the couch to keep herself from summoning a beam of pure light and cleansing Cecilia off the face of the planet. Cecilia smirked, clearly enjoying herself. But then, something in her expression shifted. A flicker of something sharp, calculating. She chuckled softly. "You know what, Ray Ray? I just had a brilliant idea." Rachel narrowed her eyes. "What?" Cecilia leaned forward, crimson eyes gleaming. "Let's do it. Let's ace this evaluation." Rachel stiffened, thrown off by the sudden change in attitude. "Why?" Cecilia's smirk deepened. "Oh, wouldn't you like to know?" Rachel was annoyed by her response, yet she didn't argue. "This is all for my grades," Rachel reminded herself as she glared at Cecilia. Honestly, she disliked how Professor Nero put Cecilia and her in the same group. Yet she also understood the reason very well. That was because even with someone like Ren, Rachel could adapt to him with ease and they would score high. The only person she would not be able to adapt to was Cecilia. But then he should put Ren with Arthur, she thought, confused why Professor Nero opted to not go for that. "Anyway, let's get started, shall we?" Cecilia said, snapping Rachel out of her thoughts. This was not going to be easy. Underscore? Spellcasting 3 wasn't a class you just wandered into on a whim. It was an advanced mind aspect course, a high-stakes arena where only the most exceptional spellcasters dare tread. Designed exclusively for white rankers and above, it wasn't a place for rookies or dreamers. And yet, here I was, walking through the door as a late addition, Still technically a high silver ranker, but wielding a gift that had catapulted me straight into the deep end. The room was smaller than I'd expected, compact and starkly futuristic. Holographic diagrams floated lazily in the air, displaying intricate spell matrices and mana theories that would have given lesser minds a headache. Every surface gleamed with a faint metallic sheen, the walls pulsing softly with embedded circuitry that seemed to hum with latent mana. Even the lighting had a purposeful sharpness to it, as if to remind us we weren't just in any classroom. This was where the best of the best sharpened their craft or, occasionally, burned out spectacularly. 6 seats were arranged in a semicircle around a central dais, where Professor Selim stood, his silver hair defying gravity and his coat lined with glowing runes. He looked like the kind of man who could incinerate you with a flick of his finger but would lecture you on your inefficient mana usage first. His eyes scanned me as I entered, their sharpness making me feel like a lab specimen under observation. "Ah," Selim said, his voice carrying the peculiar mix of exasperation and curiosity only a long-suffering genius could manage. "The late arrival, Arthur Nightingale." "Yes?" "Yes, Professor," I replied, stepping forward. The other students turned their heads toward me, a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and disinterest flashing across their faces. I could feel their scrutiny like a weight pressing against my chest. They weren't hostile, but this was clearly a group that had already established itself, and I was the newcomer disrupting their rhythm. Professor Selim gestured to an empty seat. "Take your place. And since you've so graciously joined us mid-semester, why don't you introduce yourself?" I cleared my throat, feeling the weight of 5 pairs of eyes on me. "I'm Arthur Nightingale, first year. I'm still a high silver ranker, but my gift, Lucent Harmony, allows me to cast some 5-circle spells and manipulate ambient mana with precision. I also have light and dark affinities." There was a beat of silence, broken only by the faint hum of the holographic displays. One of the third years, a tall guy with a perpetually bored expression, raised an eyebrow. "Light and dark affinities," he repeated, as if I'd just claimed to have discovered a new element. "Correct," I said, keeping my tone steady. Kali Milkith, the second-year prodigy I'd encountered during the VR mock war, leaned forward slightly, her dark eyes narrowing in interest. "You're the one who took down the 6-star beast during the last evaluation," she said. It wasn't a question. I gave a small nod, resisting the urge to flinch under her piercing gaze. "With help." Lucifer, seated at the far end of the semicircle, smirked but said nothing. Typical. Professor Selim clapped his hands, cutting through the charged atmosphere. Good. Now that introductions are done, let's move on. Today's lesson will focus on high-order spell weaving. As you all know, this involves combining elements into constructs far beyond the limitations of standard spellcasting. He turned to one of the holographic diagrams, which expanded into a dizzying array of geometric shapes and glowing sigils. "Mr. Nightingale, since you're new, I'll keep an eye on your progress. Everyone else, show him why you're here." The class got to work, each student diving into their personal mana constructs. The room came alive with the hum of concentrated energy, spells forming and dissolving in intricate patterns. Lucifer, of course, was obnoxiously smooth, weaving flames and ice into a construct so precise it looked more like art than magic. Kali worked with an intensity that seemed to draw shadows toward her, her dark magic coiling and snapping like a living thing. I focused on my own task, steadying my breathing as I began to shape a simple light-dark construct. It was a delicate balance. The two elements resisted each other like oil and water. But I could feel the threads of ambient mana responding to Lucent Harmony, fine-tuning the flow and smoothing out the rough edges. Slowly, painstakingly, the construct took form, a shimmering orb of light and shadow that pulsed with an eerie glow. "Interesting," Professor Selim said, appearing beside me without warning. "Your control over oppositional elements is unconventional. Not bad for a silver ranker, though far from perfect." "Thank you, Professor," I said, biting back the urge to ask what perfect looked like. As the class continued, I couldn't help but notice the dynamics between the students. The third years were polished, confident in their abilities but clearly wary of anyone encroaching on their expertise. Kali was sharp and efficient, her movements precise, her expressions unreadable. Lucifer effortlessly commanding attention with every spell he cast. And then there was me trying to carve out a place in this new environment without tripping over my own feet. By the end of the session, my head was spinning with new techniques and theories. Spellcasting 3 wasn't just a class, it was a battlefield, a place where only the most adaptable survived. But as I packed up my things and prepared to leave, I felt a quiet determination settling in my chest. I had a long way to go, but I was here, and I wasn't planning on being left behind. Chapter 66, Paired Evaluation 1. The paired evaluation was finally here, and with it came a buzz of nervous energy that hummed through the entire first-year class. All 100 of us were escorted to a colossal hall that looked like a fusion of a high-tech arena and a scientific testing facility. The walls shimmered faintly with monoreactive barriers, and overhead, a lattice of holographic displays showcased live updates of the evaluations as they unfolded. The air smelled faintly of ozone, the telltale sign of concentrated mono hanging in the atmosphere. Rows of seats lined the observation decks above, where professors and assistants lounged with data tablets in hand, ready to analyze and assign grades. Below, the floor gleamed like polished obsidian, lined with faint grooves where containment fields would activate for each test. We were shuffled into our pairs and sorted by class. The weaker sections were taken to one side of the hall, where they would be facing more manageable challenges, though I could tell from the nervous whispers that the prospect of even a 4-star beast was enough to make some of them sweat bullets. "All right, everyone," Professor Nero's voice echoed through the hall, amplified by the speaker systems. His tone was brisk, but not unkind. "Listen carefully. Each pair will face a beast suited to your current skill levels. Your task is not necessarily to defeat it, though, if you can. Excellent, but to demonstrate teamwork and synergy. Your grade will depend entirely on how well you work together. This is not a solo contest." He let the words sink in, his sharp gaze sweeping over us. "We will start with the lowest ranked students. Once you are called, step into the containment zone and await the arrival of your assigned beast." The first pair was called a nervous-looking boy and girl from Class 1D. They shuffled forward, their expressions a mix of dread and resignation. As they stepped into the shimmering containment field, the grooves in the floor lit up, and a 4-star beast materialized at the far end. It was a Shadow Fang Volf, a sleek, dark-furred predator that moved with predatory grace. The pair hesitated, exchanging panicked glances before launching into an uncoordinated assault. It was almost painful to watch the boy's fire spell missed entirely, scorching the floor instead, while the girl's shield flickered under the Volf's relentless assault. They managed to survive, barely, but the lack of coordination was glaring. The holographic display above them flashed a grade, C. Nero sighed audibly. Next. The evaluations continued in a similar fashion, with pairs stepping up, fumbling through their fights, and receiving their grades. A few managed to work together well enough to earn respectable marks, a B here, a B+ there, but most struggled. The 4-star beasts proved a decent challenge, especially for students who had clearly spent more time honing their individual skills than learning to cooperate. As the beasts shifted to 5-star levels, the tension in the room thickened. The containment field hummed louder, and the beasts that emerged were visibly more dangerous. Thunderclaw griffins, razorback boars, and Tyburn serpents all made appearances, each testing the limits of the students who faced them. Then Rose's name was called. I turned my head instinctively, spotting her standing a few rows away. She looked determined, though there was a flicker of apprehension in her eyes. Her partner, a wiry boy with a confident smirk, seemed more eager than concerned. "Good luck," I called out, raising a hand to wave at her. She glanced my way, her lips twitching into a brief smile before she turned and strode toward the containment field. Their assigned beast was a Tyburn stalker, its sleek, amphibious form shimmering as it slithered into the arena. The creature's long, sinuous body moved with unnerving speed, and its tail flicked dangerously as it eyed the two students with predatory focus. Rose didn't waste time. She cast a defensive barrier almost immediately, her mana weaving into a dome of translucent energy that shimmered faintly with her natural affinity for water magic. Her partner moved in tandem, launching a series of well-aimed fire spells to keep the beast at bay. It was a marked improvement over most of the earlier pairs. They didn't trip over each other's moves, and Rose's protective instincts paired well with her partner's aggressive style. Still, the Typhon Stalker was relentless, and there were a few close calls where its whip-like tail nearly broke through the barrier. When the fight ended, the containment field deactivated, and the display above their heads lit up with a B+. Not perfect, but far better than most had managed so far. Rose returned to the sidelines, her face flushed but triumphant. I gave her a small thumbs up, and she rolled her eyes, but didn't hide the smile tugging at her lips. Finally, it was our turn. Arthur Nightingale and Seraphina Zenith, Nero announced. I glanced at Seraphina. She looked as calm as ever, her expression unreadable, but there was a subtle tension in the way she gripped the hilt of her sword. Together, we stepped into the containment field, the air buzzing faintly as the barrier activated around us. At the far end of the arena, the grooves in the floor lit up once more, and the beast materialized. A 6-star abyssal tide serpent. The same beast I had barely survived on the Olive Escher breeze, though this one looked even larger and more vicious. Seraphina drew her blade, her stance fluid and poised. I tightened my grip on my own weapon, feeling the surge of Lucent harmony humming through me, ready to adapt to whatever we faced. Let's show them what teamwork looks like, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Seraphina nodded, a faint smile playing at her lips. Let's. The 6-star beast before us wasn't some abyssal tide serpent. It was far worse. A Dreadclaw Ravager. A monstrous hybrid of bird and reptile, standing at least 15 feet tall. Its claws gleamed like tempered steel, and its wings bore jagged feathers brimming with razor-sharp edges. It screeched, the sound reverberating like a shockwave through the containment hall. Sparks of lightning rippled along its talons, and its breath radiated with searing heat. This was no ordinary beast, it was destruction incarnate. Seraphina stood beside me, her gaze locked on the beast, her grip firm on her sword. Her posture was calm, her breathing even, but I could sense the tension in her movements. She was a swordsman through and through, a practitioner of Mount Hua's Seven Blossoms blade art, elegant yet devastating. But compared to me, her spellcasting was rudimentary. This fight would rely on both of us using our strengths to complement the other's weaknesses. I'll handle the beast's movements, she said without looking at me, her voice steady. You'll strike when it's open. Got it, I replied, drawing my sword and letting silver mana seep through my body. Lucent harmony surged within me, its power wrapping around my senses like a second skin. The ambient mana in the containment field hummed, ready to be shaped. The Dreadclaw Ravager didn't wait for us to make the first move. With a thunderous screech, it launched itself forward, claws slashing down with terrifying speed. The air crackled as lightning arced from its talons. Move, I shouted, dodging to the left as Seraphina darted right. The ground where we had stood exploded into shards of stone and sparks. Seraphina was already on the offensive. She dashed forward, her blade glowing faintly with violet mana, the first movement of her Violet Mist Divine art, Violet Sunset Genesis. Her strike was precise, targeting the joint in the beast's wing. The Ravager twisted unnaturally fast, raising its wing to block. Seraphine's blade met resistance, scraping against the beast's hardened feathers, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she pivoted, landing a follow-up strike that forced the Ravager back a step. Not bad, I muttered, impressed by her control. The beast screeched again, spreading its wings wide. A powerful gust of wind erupted from its feathers, threatening to throw us off balance. Seraphina braced herself, her blade anchoring her, while I called upon the ambient mana around me, weaving wind and fire elements into a quick counterspell. The dust collided with a fiery burst, dissipating in midair. "Keep it busy," I shouted, already drawing in more mana. Lucent Harmony allowed me to pull from multiple elements with ease, and I began weaving a complex spell, a mix of lightning and light elements. The spell formed a radiant blade of energy that hovered above my hand, its edges crackling with power. Serafina didn't hesitate. She charged forward, her footwork impeccable as she unleashed a flurry of strikes with her Seven Blossoms blade art. Each swing was calculated, forcing the beast to focus entirely on her. She wasn't trying to land a killing blow, she was creating openings for me. The Ravager countered with a swipe of its claws, aiming to catch her off guard. Serafina ducked low, her movements fluid as water, and retaliated with an upward slash that clipped one of the beast's talons. The Dreadclaw let out an enraged shriek, its focus momentarily faltering. Now, I surged forward, the radiant blade of energy in hand, and struck. The blade sliced through the air, colliding with the beast's exposed flank in an explosion of light and sound. The Ravager stumbled, its screech turning into a pained roar. Dark ichor oozed from the wound, sizzling where it touched the ground. But the beast wasn't done. Its tail lashed out like a whip, and I barely had time to react. I jumped back, the tail grazing my armor and sending a jolt of pain through my side. "Arthur," Serafina called, concern flickering in her voice. "I'm fine," I gritted out, steadying myself. The beast's eyes glowed with renewed fury, and lightning began to gather around its claws. "It's charging for something big," I warned. "We need to stop it now." Serafina nodded, her expression hardening. She raised her blade, the violet glow intensifying. She was preparing another movement of her violet mist divine art, her mana coiling tightly around her sword. Meanwhile, I prepared my strongest move, God Flash. The technique required precision, perfect timing, and immense mana output. With Lucent Harmony, I could amplify its power further, but it would drain me significantly. "Serafina," I said, my voice firm. "I'll strike from above, force it into position." "Understood," she replied, stepping forward without hesitation. The Ravager screeched, releasing a torrent of lightning that split the ground between us. Serafina dashed to the side, avoiding the blast, and closed the distance with a series of rapid steps. Her blade moved in a blur, each strike forcing the beast to retreat toward the center of the containment field. The ambient mana around me surged as I gathered it, focusing entirely on the God Flash. Lightning coiled around my sword, merging seamlessly with light mana to create a blade of radiant energy that pulsed with barely contained power. I leapt into the air, positioning myself above the beast. Now I shouted. Serafina unleashed her strike, her blade erupting with violet light as she delivered a devastating flash across the Ravager's chest. The beast reared back, its head exposed. I didn't waste the opening. With a burst of speed, I descended, the energy around my blade crackling violently. God Flash! The impact was cataclysmic. The containment field shuddered as the energy from the strike exploded outward, enveloping the Ravager in a blinding flash of light. The beast let out one final, deafening screech before collapsing to the ground, its massive body motionless. The room was silent except for the sound of our labored breathing. "Well done," Nero's voice echoed, breaking the silence. "That's the level of teamwork I wanted to see." Serafina sheathed her blade, her expression as calm as ever, though I caught the faintest hint of satisfaction in her eyes. I lowered my sword, the glow of Lucent Harmony fading as exhaustion set in. We hadn't defeated the beast outright, but we had done more than enough to prove our worth together. Chapter 67, Paired Evaluation 2. "Incredible," Rachel murmured under her breath, her sapphire eyes locked on Arthur. She wasn't one to throw around praise lightly, but watching him now, it was hard not to. Arthur wasn't just strong, he was absurdly, ridiculously strong. His individual power was second only to Lucifer's, but what truly set him apart wasn't raw strength, it was his mind. His ability to think 10 steps ahead and make anyone he partnered with shine. Watching him and Serafina fight, it was as if they trained together for years. Every movement they made complemented the others, as if they shared a silent, unspoken understanding. Rachel folded her arms, her lips curving into a small smile despite herself. This was why Professor Nero hadn't paired him with Ren. She understood now. Even though Ren heavily disliked Arthur, their abilities were so complementary that Nero probably worried they'd accidentally overshadow the rest of the class. Instead, Nero had chosen the duo with the least natural chemistry, Arthur and Serafina. And yet, it hadn't mattered. Arthur's versatility made everything work. Rachel could practically see the calculations running through his mind as he fought, every spell, every move of his sword perfectly timed to give Serafina the edge she needed. He's too versatile, Rachel thought, her mind running through potential combinations. She tried pairing him mentally with Jin, Yan, even Renan. Every single scenario worked. It wasn't arrogance or overestimation. It was the truth. Arthur was adaptable to a frightening degree. His gift, Lucent Harmony, let him wield all 11 elements with ease, combining them with such finesse that his spellcasting was just as deadly as his swordsmanship. She bit her lip thoughtfully. Lucent Harmony was technically a body aspect gift, yet it enhanced his spellcasting just as much as his physical prowess. It was unfair. No, that wasn't the word. Unparalleled, the cream of the crop of body aspect gifts. Her musings were interrupted as Nero's voice called her and Cecilia forward. Rachel Creighton and Cecilia Slatemark, it's your turn. Rachel exhaled, pushing her thoughts of Arthur aside. Now it was her turn to prove herself. She stepped forward alongside Cecilia, the two of them facing the containment field as the 6-star beast was released. A massive obsidian scorcher emerged, a reptilian predator with scales that shimmered like molten rock and smoke curling from its nostrils. Its eyes glowed a fiery red, and when it roared, the heat in the air spiked noticeably. Well, this will be fun, Cecilia drawled, her crimson eyes gleaming with excitement. Rachel didn't reply immediately. He tightened her grip on her staff, golden mana beginning to swirl around her. Focus, Cecilia. We need to work together. Oh, I'll work with you, Ray, Cecilia teased, though there was a sharper edge to her voice now. She extended her arms, crimson mana coiling around her fingers like living fire. Let's see if this saintess can keep up. Underscore. Incredible heat radiated from the obsidian scorcher, the 6-star beast towering before us like a molten leviathan dragged straight from the heart of a volcano. Its molten scales shimmered with fiery light, casting rippling waves of heat that made the ground beneath us crack. Smoke curled from its nostrils, and its red, ember-like eyes locked onto us with a predatory glint. It's like facing a living furnace, I thought as my fingers tightened around my staff. My golden mana flared to life, light magic swirling around me in soft waves as I prepared for the fight. Not gonna lie, Ray, Cecilia drawled from beside me, her voice laced with that familiar teasing edge. This one's a bit scarier than your usual glowing monsters. We don't have time for your jokes, I snapped, though my tone lacked its usual sharpness. The tension in the air was suffocating. Focus, Cecilia. Her crimson mana began to coil around her like a serpent, her expression shifting from playful to sharp. Don't worry, I'll burn it to cinders. The scorcher didn't wait for us to strategize further. It roared, the sound echoing through the hall like a volcanic eruption, and lunged with surprising speed for something its size. Its claws raked through the air, leaving trails of molten energy in their wake. I barely had time to raise a barrier before the strike connected. The force of the impact sent me skidding backward, my boots digging into the ground as I held the barrier firm. Cracks spidered across the shimmering golden shield, but it held for now. Cecilia, I shouted, now. She didn't need further instruction. Her crimson mana surged, and with a flick of her wrist, she unleashed a spiraling inferno toward the scorcher. The flames roared, striking the beast's side with a thunderous explosion. For a moment, the molten scales seemed to dim, blackening under the onslaught. But then the scorcher reared back, shaking off the flames like a dog shedding water. Its molten hide glowed even brighter, absorbing the heat of Cecilia's attack. A smirk spread across the beast's reptilian maw, and it retaliated with a burst of superheated air. The wave struck like a freight train, forcing both of us to dive in opposite directions to avoid being roasted alive. Is it absorbing my fire? Cecilia growled, rolling to her feet and glaring at the beast. Great. Fantastic. Just what I needed. Stop feeding it mana, I shouted, summoning a concentrated beam of light magic. I aimed for its eyes, hoping to blind it and slow its advance. The beam connected, and the Scorcher let out an irritated roar, stumbling as it swiped blindly at the air. Nice shot, Cecilia admitted grudgingly. Fine. I'll switch it up. She extended her hands, weaving together fire and wine mana in an intricate pattern. A moment later, a vortex of crimson flames erupted around the Scorcher's legs, restricting its movement and kicking up a cloud of ash and embers. I took the opportunity to reposition, darting closer to its flank and firing a volley of light-based projectiles. Each one struck with pinpoint accuracy, chipping away at its molten armor. The Scorcher, however, wasn't going down without a fight. It slammed its tail into the ground, the force creating a shockwave that sent jagged chunks of molten rock hurtling in every direction. I raised another barrier, the golden shield flickering as it absorbed the brunt of the attack, but the strain was beginning to show. Ray, your shields are cracking, Cecilia called out, her voice laced with genuine concern. Don't push yourself too hard. I'm fine, I shot back, gritting my teeth as I poured more mana into the barrier. Just keep attacking. Cecilia smirked, her crimson mana flaring brighter. You got it. She launched herself forward, crimson flames trailing behind her like a comet as she closed the distance between herself and the Scorcher. With a flick of her wrist, she conjured a massive fireball not aimed directly at the beast, but at the ground beneath its feet. The resulting explosion sent the Scorcher off balance, its molten claws scrabbling for purchase on the unstable terrain. Rachel! Now Cecilia shouted. I didn't hesitate. Summoning every ounce of light mana I could muster, I unleashed a piercing beam of golden energy directly at the Scorcher's exposed chest. The attack struck true, and for a moment, it seemed as though the beast might actually falter. But the Scorcher was far from finished. It roared, the sound reverberating through the hall as its molten body began to glow with an even more intense heat. The temperature in the room skyrocketed, and I felt beads of sweat forming on my brow despite my protective barriers. It's going to explode, I warned, recognizing the signs of an area of effect attack. Not if I can help it, Cecilia muttered, her eyes narrowing. She began weaving another spell, her movements faster and more fluid than before. This time, the spell was a combination of fire and wine mana, creating a spiraling vortex that surrounded the Scorcher and contained its destructive energy. The beast struggled against the containment, its molten scales cracking as it poured all its power into escaping. But Cecilia's spell held firm, giving me just enough time to prepare a finishing move. Together, I said, glancing at Cecilia. She nodded, her smirk replaced by a look of fierce determination. We unleashed our combined attack, a beam of pure light magic from me and a crimson inferno from Cecilia. The two spells converged, striking the Scorcher with an explosive force that sent shockwaves rippling through the hall. When the dust settled, the beast lay motionless, its molten body cooling as the last remnants of its energy faded. Silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of our labored breathing. Rachel Creighton and Cecilia Slatemark, Nero's voice finally rang out, his tone neutral but tinged with approval. A plus. Well done. Cecilia turned to me, a triumphant grin spreading across her face. Not bad, Ray. I guess you're not completely useless. I rolled my eyes, but a small smile tugged at my lips. You're not so bad yourself, Cecilia. For once, there was no snarky comeback. Just a mutual nod of respect. Chapter 68, Paired Evaluation 3. What's this? Cecilia's voice lilted as she sauntered up to me, the picture of mischief wrapped in an imperial princess's composure. Her smirk alone could ignite a diplomatic incident. She leaned closer, crimson eyes gleaming with that maddening spark of hers. did I surprise you again?" It was such a Cecilia thing to say. Casual, teasing, and utterly infuriating, I resisted the urge to groan. God, she's such a hassle, I thought, forcing my expression into something neutral. In the novel, this evaluation had been a spectacular disaster for Rachel and Cecilia. They had failed so colossally that their F grade became a running joke among the other students. But this wasn't the novel anymore. Somehow, their fractured dynamic had turned into an A+ performance. And from the look Cecilia was giving me, it wasn't just coincidence. "Perhaps," I replied evenly, my gaze steady as hers sparkled with satisfaction. Cecilia's smirk widened, her cheeks taking on a faint flush. "You really," she began, pausing as though debating just how dramatic to be. Finally, she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a sultry whisper, "I'm going to shock you so much one day that you'll kneel before me." If I hadn't already known she was a bit unhinged, that statement would have done it. Crazy, I thought, watching as she turned on her heel, her golden hair swishing dramatically as she walked away. She was practically radiating self-satisfaction. Before I could fully process her departure, my attention shifted to Rachel, standing a few steps away. Her sapphire eyes were locked onto us, her expression a strange mix of irritation and something sharper. The moment our eyes met, she turned her head with an almost theatrical air, clearly trying to pretend she hadn't been watching. Rachel wasn't the jealous type, not in the conventional sense. But she was perceptive, and right now, she looked both annoyed and a little hurt. I should fix this, I thought, sighing inwardly as I headed toward her. "Hey, Rach, congrats," I said lightly, hoping to steer the conversation somewhere neutral. She didn't reply. Instead, she kept her head turned, as if the very sight of me was an affront to her existence. I blinked, caught off guard. "She's cute when she's mad," I thought absently, then mentally kicked myself. Not the time. "Sorry," she said at last, her voice tinged with sarcasm. "Was my gaze annoying you and your fun time with Cecilia?" The way she said fun was like someone spitting out something unpleasant. Her tone could have melted steel. "That wasn't a fun time at all, Rachel," I said earnestly, resisting the urge to laugh at her theatrics. Rachel turned her head slightly, finally meeting my gaze, her sapphire eyes narrowing. "Really? Because it sure looked like it from here." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Cecilia's jest. "A hassle," she interrupted, her brow arching. "Or are you actually enjoying her little games?" "She's a handful," I admitted, earning a skeptical look, "but I'd hardly call it enjoyable. Honestly, if you could read my mind during those conversations, you'd know I'm spending most of them wishing for a fast-forward button." Rachel's glare softened, though she didn't entirely drop her guard. "She's not exactly the most stable person," she said carefully. "I'm aware," I said, glancing briefly toward where Cecilia had disappeared, her presence like the aftermath of a small tornado. "But you don't need to worry about that. She just likes stirring the pot." Rachel studied me for a moment, her arms crossed. Then, with a sigh, she finally relaxed. "Fine. But if she gets any ideas about dragging you into her chaos, don't come crying to me." I grinned. "Noted. And for the record, I'd rather team up with you than her any day." Her eyes widened briefly before she looked away, muttering something about how I shouldn't make it a habit to flatter people. But the slight pink tint to her cheeks didn't escape my notice. The last two pairs performed better than they had during practice. Lucifer and Jin managed AB+, while Ian and Ren scraped NA, both respectable scores, for the evaluation. It was clear everyone had made progress, though some more begrudgingly than others. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of Serafina. She stood apart, her usual air of serene detachment firmly in place, but something was different. Her gaze lingered in my direction, subtle, yet unmistakable. Then, without a word, she pulled out her phone and began typing furiously, her lips moving in what seemed like a whispered monologue to herself. I had no idea what she was saying, but the sheer intensity of it sent a shiver down my spine. I can't hear her, I thought, and maybe that's for the best. Deciding that Seraphine's mutterings were a mystery for another time, I shifted my attention and made my way to Rose, who was standing near one of the holographic displays, the soft glow reflecting off her glasses. "Congratulations on your grade, Rose," I greeted her with a warm smile. Rose turned, her own smile lighting up her face. "Same to you, Arthur." "A plus look at you," she said, her tone teasing but genuinely happy for me. We slipped into an easy conversation, catching up on how everyone was faring after the evaluation. Rose had that rare talent of making even the most mundane subjects seem engaging, and I found myself grinning more than I realized. But then I noticed something odd. Her gaze kept flickering to the side. It was subtle at first, just a glance every now and then, but soon enough, it became impossible to ignore. "Is something wrong?" I asked, tilting my head in curiosity. Rose rubbed her arm awkwardly, her cheeks tinged with faint embarrassment. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's just," she paused, her lips tightening for a moment before continuing. "Cecilia and Rachel are staring. A lot." I blinked, staring. Rose gave a tiny nod, trying and failing to appear nonchalant. "Yeah." Like laser-focused staring. You know, the kind where they think they're being subtle, but they're absolutely not. I resisted the urge to look immediately, though the idea of both Cecilia and Rachel staring daggers or possibly plasma bolts at us was more than a little unsettling. "What are they even staring at?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Rose shrugged, but her lips twitched into a sly smile. "Oh, I don't know." "Maybe it's because I've stolen all of your attention." "Stolen? That implies I'm a finite resource," I said, trying to match her playful tone. "Arthur, anyone who knows those two knows you're their favorite limited edition collectible," she teased, crossing her arms with a faux serious expression. "They're probably trying to calculate how much time I'm allowed to have before they swoop in." I laughed, shaking my head. "You're overthinking it. Rachel's probably just tired, and Cecilia. Who knows? She's Cecilia." Rose smirked, giving me a pointed look. "Right. And here I thought you were the tactical genius who could read people like a book." "Some books are written in languages I'd rather not learn," I replied, earning a soft laugh from her. But even as we continued chatting, I couldn't help but feel those gazes on me, sharp and unrelenting. Cecilia and Rachel weren't just watching. They were calculating, scheming each in their own way. And while I wasn't entirely sure what they were planning, I had the distinct sense that my peaceful moment with Rose had a countdown timer attached to it. Chapter 69, Necromancy 101. After the paired evaluation wrapped up, the Academy returned to its usual rhythm. Classes resumed, though the hum of anticipation for midterms lingered in the air. Midterms would mark the official close of our first semester at Mythos Academy, and by that point, I realized it would have been 3.5 months since I arrived in this world. Time was moving fast, and I wasn't sure if I was catching up or falling behind. During one of our theory classes, Professor Nero deviated from the standard curriculum, which was saying something considering he was already a man prone to detours. He leaned against his desk, arms crossed, and surveyed us with the kind of look that promised to either enlighten or confuse everyone in the room. "How developed do you think the current human power system is?" Nero asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. A few students exchanged uncertain glances. Rachel, ever the proactive one, raised her hand. "What do you mean, Professor?" "Exactly what I said," he replied, his voice warm yet laced with an undercurrent of challenge. "Our power system, how far has it been developed? How complete do you think it is? Or, better yet, how incomplete?" A few murmurs rippled through the class. It wasn't often Nero asked open-ended questions like this, and when he did, you could bet he had a point to make. "Let's start with what we know," Nero continued, his tone shifting to lecture mode. "Human power is divided into 3 aspects: body, mind, and soul. Each plays a vital role in growth and strength. The body aspect governs martial prowess, physical abilities, aura, techniques, The mind aspect oversees spellcasting, magic circles, mana control. And then he paused for effect. We have the soul aspect. His gaze swept the room, daring someone to interject. No one did. The soul aspect is underwhelmingly understood. To put it politely, he said, smiling faintly. It's a vital part of the power system, yet it remains the most underdeveloped. Unlike the body and mind aspects, which have been refined over millennia, soul remains largely uncharted territory. He gestured toward the screen behind him, which displayed a simplified diagram of the three aspects. Let me put it this way. How many of you have ever heard of a soul aspect gift? The room was silent. Not a single hand was raised. Exactly, Nero said, his tone shifting to one of deliberate gravity. No soul aspect gift has ever been discovered among humans, not one. The weight of his words settled over us like a heavy blanket. It wasn't just that the soul aspect was underdeveloped, it was that no one even knew where to begin with it. Nero began pacing, his hands clasped behind his back. Let's take necromancy, for example, he said. It's the closest humanity has come to harnessing the soul aspect. Necromancers manipulate souls, yes, but how do they do it? Through the mind aspect, Jin answered. Exactly, Nero said, spinning on his heel. Even necromancy, the art of controlling souls, is fundamentally a mind aspect discipline. The most powerful necromancy gift, Necromancer's Touch, doesn't utilize the soul aspect directly. It operates through the circle method, which is tied to the mind. Rachel raised her hand again, her brow furrowed in thought. But why? If the soul aspect is so vital, why haven't we developed it further? Nero's smile was faint, almost rueful. That, Miss Creighton, is the golden question. The soul aspect is vital, yes, but it's also elusive. We know it exists. We know it plays a role in radiant rank metamorphosis, where the soul undergoes a profound change, enabling individuals to manipulate the space-time axis with mere presence. But beyond that, he spread his hands in a shrug. Nothing. We're flying blind. The soul aspect is a gaping hole in our understanding of power, Nero said, his voice steady but firm. It's the missing puzzle piece, the part of ourselves we've yet to fully grasp. And until we do, humanity will remain incomplete. He let the words hang in the air for a moment before turning back to the class. Now, he said, his tone lightening just a fraction. Who wants to take a wild guess at how we might bridge that gap? No one answered. I leaned back in my seat, my mind whirring. If the soul aspect was truly that underdeveloped, then humanity's current system wasn't just incomplete, it was vulnerable. There were entire avenues of power waiting to be explored, waiting to be weaponized, and if someone else got there first. I shook the thought away. It was too big, too overwhelming. But I couldn't help but wonder, if the soul aspect was the key to the next stage of evolution, what would it take to unlock it? And would I be ready when that time came? Other than the usual classes, my overall workload had somehow increased. Aura Mechanics, Spellcasting 3, and now specializations in both light and dark magic, each treated as entirely unique disciplines. These weren't casual electives either, they were rigorous, highly focused courses designed to push us past the limits of our understanding. For light magic, I was paired with Rachel, a combination that, at the very least, was easy to work with. Rachel's affinity for light magic was obvious. She practically radiated the element. Watching her work with it was like watching someone breathe, natural, effortless. Dark magic, however, was a different story. That class was just me and Jin, and while Rachel was like sunlight incarnate, Jin carried the aura of someone born to navigate the shadows. He didn't just use dark magic, he wielded it like it was a blade forged in the recesses of his mind. The dynamic between us was quiet but oddly effective. Jin was focused on his work, a figure of silent precision, while I tried not to look like a complete amateur in a subject that wasn't exactly intuitive. Necromancy, the word alone carried a weight, conjuring images of rotting skeletons clawing their way out of graves. But the reality was, Different? In the Western continent, the hub of necromancy, the practice had evolved far beyond the crude depictions of horror stories. It wasn't about cobbling together random corpses from battlefields or graveyards anymore. No, the modern necromancer didn't work with scraps. Instead, they bought professionally prepared corpses cleaned, programmed, and reinforced to serve specific purposes. It was a billion-credit industry that combined biotechnology with mana refinement. These corpses were tailored, optimized for functionality, and, honestly, felt closer to autonomous machines than anything else. Expensive, sure, but leagues more efficient than the grim improvisation necromancy had once been. The professor, a stoic man with an unshakable demeanor, turned his attention to me after giving Jin a separate assignment. Jin, without a word, moved to the far side of the room, his short swords glinting faintly as he began experimenting with a particularly complex necromantic formation. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of envy at how effortlessly he carried himself in this field. "Arthur," the professor said, his sharp eyes locking onto me. "It honestly won't be possible for you to become a master of dark magic. Not without years of exclusive dedication." Well, that was blunt. But he continued, his tone softening just slightly. "You don't need to. Your approach should be different. Dark magic doesn't need to be your foundation. It can be a complementary force, a secondary weapon in your arsenal. And with your talent for spell weaving, it can be used to devastating effect when paired with other elements." I nodded, processing his words. He wasn't wrong. The versatility of Lucent Harmony gave me an edge, but it also meant I couldn't specialize in everything. Dark magic would have to play a supporting role in my overall strategy. "What you should focus on," he said, "is summoning." "Summoning," I repeated, tilting my head slightly. "Yes, a necromantic summon is a cornerstone of dark magic. For someone with your affinities and potential, a single, powerful summon could serve as an extension of your abilities. But that depends entirely on your talent for it." "Should I test that now?" I asked, trying not to sound too eager. The professor nodded. "We'll start with a basic summoning matrix. Focus on drawing the mana threads precisely. Summoning is as much about control as it is about power." He gestured toward an empty corner of the room, where a sleek, circular platform embedded with faintly glowing runes awaited. "Stand there. Use the dark mana I've supplied to form the core. The rest is up to you." I stepped onto the platform, feeling the hum of latent mana beneath my feet. The instructions were simple enough: channel the provided mana through the runes, shape it into a structure, and see what emerged. Easy, in theory, in practice. Summoning was notoriously difficult, requiring not just skill but a deep connection to the magic being used. I exhaled slowly, letting my senses expand. The dark mana around me was dense, heavy, like trying to weave threads of shadow into a cohesive form. I began tracing the pattern of the matrix with my will, coaxing the energy into a shape that felt right. The platform began to pulse, the runes glowing brighter as the mana took form. Slowly, a figure materialized, a hulking, wolf-like creature with gleaming obsidian fur and eyes that burned like dying embers. Its presence was raw, primal, and undeniably powerful. The professor stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "Interesting? For a first attempt, that's remarkable." The wolf growled low, the sound reverberating through the room like distant thunder. I could feel its energy tethered to mine, a link forged through the summoning process. It wasn't perfect, but it was there, a connection that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. "You have a natural talent for summoning," the professor said, his tone matter of fact. "This creature is a reflection of your will. Its strength comes from you. But remember, one strong summon is better than 10 weak ones." I stepped off the platform, the wolf fading back as the summoning ended. My mind buzzed with possibilities. A single, powerful summon, something that could fight alongside me, complementing my abilities and covering my weaknesses. It was an intriguing thought. Chapter 70, Light Magic 101. After my very eventful dark magic class, one that had involved testing my summoning ability, to frankly alarming results, I found myself heading to the bright, almost blindingly cheerful room designated for light magic studies. The contrast was stark, but fitting. Light and dark magic were two sides of a coin, intertwined and yet distinctly their own. Rachel was already there when I arrived. She was seated cross-legged on one of the sleek, floating chairs, hands clasped together in front of her like she was deep in meditation or prayer. "What are you doing?" I asked, quirking an eyebrow as I dropped into the chair next to her. Her sapphire eyes fluttered open, and she smiled softly. "It's kind of like praying," she said, tilting her head. "But not really praying at the same time." I stared at her, trying to decipher her cryptic explanation. Praying. Religion had been more or less eradicated in this world, replaced by the unshakable belief in power, progress, and raw human, or in some cases, in human potential. The word saintess, for example, no longer referred to some divine emissary, but to someone like Rachel, a person born with overwhelming light magic talent that defied logic. A title of awe and reverence earned through raw capability, not celestial blessing. "Well, whatever you're doing, it looks complicated," I muttered, not sure if I should be impressed or concerned. Rachel's magic always felt so deeply personal, almost spiritual in a way I couldn't quite grasp. Before she could respond, the professor entered, her footsteps barely audible against the smooth polymer floor. Professor Myra was a no-nonsense woman with piercing eyes and an air of precision. Everything about her, from the way she carried herself to the immaculate white coat she wore, screamed efficiency. "Let's get started," she said briskly, her sharp gaze cutting across the room. Her eyes settled on me, narrowing slightly. "Arthur, you're a new addition to this class. Tell me, how do you imagine light magic fitting into your combat style?" I straightened in my seat, meeting her gaze. "The first use case I imagine is integrating it into my signature spell, God Flash," I said evenly. For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then her eyebrows shot up. "You have a signature spell?" She echoed, a hint of surprise softening her usually stoic tone. "At your age? That's remarkable." Rachel glanced at me, a flicker of curiosity sparking in her eyes. I could almost hear the question forming in her mind. God Flash. When did you come up with that? But she didn't voice it. "It's still a work in progress," I admitted, scratching the back of my neck. "But it's designed to channel lightning mana and light magic into a single, concentrated strike. The idea is to enhance both speed and power while maintaining precision." Professor Myra nodded slowly, her analytical gaze dissecting my words. "An ambitious concept," she said, "and a challenging one to execute. Light magic is notoriously difficult to control when combined with other elements. It demands finesse, balance, and an acute understanding of mana flow." "That's why I'm here," I said simply. Her lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "Indeed. Let's see what you're capable of." The next hour was a whirlwind of exercises. Rachel and I were tasked with channeling light magic into various forms: shields, beams, even fine threads that could be woven into intricate patterns. Rachel, of course, excelled effortlessly. Her affinity for light magic was so natural it was almost unfair. Watching her work was like watching an artist paint a masterpiece with a flick of their wrist. I, on the other hand, struggled. Light magic required an exactness that didn't come easily to me. It wasn't like dark magic, which thrived on instinct and manipulation. Light was orderly, demanding structure and clarity. Every time I tried to force it into a form, it pushed back, slipping through my grasp like a stubborn ray of sunlight. "You're overthinking it," Rachel said at one point, her voice soft but firm. "Light magic isn't about control. It's about understanding. You don't force it, you guide it." Her words lingered in my mind as I tried again, this time focusing less on dominating the mana and more on aligning myself with its flow. Slowly, the resistance eased, and a faint, golden glow began to form in my palm. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. By the end of the session, my head was buzzing with information, my mana reserves were low, and my hands were trembling from the sheer effort of keeping the light magic stable. But as I glanced at the faint shimmer still lingering around my fingers, I couldn't help but feel a spark of satisfaction. Professor Myra approached as we were packing up. "Arthur," she said, her tone less sharp than usual, "your progress today was promising. Light magic doesn't come naturally to you, but with time and practice, I believe you can integrate it into your combat style effectively." "Thank you, Professor," I said, nodding. As she walked away, Rachel leaned closer, her smile warm and genuine. "You did well today," she said. "Better than I expected, honestly." "Thanks," I replied, meeting her gaze. "Coming from you, that actually means a lot." Her cheeks flushed slightly, and she quickly looked away, mumbling something about how I shouldn't let it go to my head. I chuckled, the sound faint in the softly lit room, feeling a curious warmth settle in my chest. "Light magic is fundamentally tied to belief, Arthur," Rachel said after a moment, her tone shifting into the measured cadence she used when explaining something important. "Belief," I tilted my head, curious, as in faith. But faith in what? The universe. Myself. Not necessarily faith in a divine being, she clarified, brushing a strand of her golden hair behind her ear. Light magic isn't religious. Not anymore. It's more about belief in concepts, hope, purpose, justice, or even something as simple as believing in the outcome you're fighting for. Like how mana reacts to our emotions, light magic is uniquely responsive to the strength of our convictions. That's why I was doing that during lesson time. For me, belief is everything. "That thing you were doing," I said slowly, recalling the image of her clasped hands, her serene expression. It looked a lot like praying. Rachel chuckled softly, though there was a wistful edge to it. "It's not praying, not really. It's more like grounding myself. Reminding myself what I stand for, what I fight for. The stronger my belief, the stronger my magic." I nodded, letting her words sink in. Belief. It sounded deceptively simple, but I knew better. That sounds harder than it seems, I admitted. She looked at me, her sapphire eyes softening. "It is. Light magic is tricky like that. But you've already tapped into it with your gift, Arthur. Lucent harmony isn't just about raw power, it's tied to your will, your ability to connect and command." I processed her words, thinking of the times I'd used lucent harmony under pressure. She wasn't wrong, it wasn't just a tool. It was an extension of my intent, of my resolve. "But Arthur," Rachel said, her tone shifting into something quieter, more serious, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, Rach," I replied easily, though the weight in her voice caught my attention. "Do you still want to surpass Lucifer? Even now, after seeing how strong he is? After fighting alongside him?" Her gaze bore into mine, a mixture of curiosity and concern lighting her features. I paused for only a moment, my answer already clear. "Yes," I said firmly, my voice steady. "There's no doubt in my mind. I will surpass Lucifer." Rachel's sapphire eyes widened, her lips parting slightly as if she hadn't expected such a direct answer. She steadied me, her expression unreadable, before lowering her head, a small, soft smile gracing her lips. "Good answer," she said, her voice quiet but filled with something warm, something almost proud. She turned away then, her golden hair catching the light in a way that made it shimmer like threads of sunlight. For a moment, I simply watched her, the way her posture relaxed as though she'd come to a conclusion about something. I didn't press her further. Rachel wasn't the type to reveal everything she was thinking. And yet, her smile lingered in my mind, a faint and inexplicable reassurance. Chapter 71. Seraphine's Entertainment. Serafina Zenith had what most people would call an enviable life. As the princess of the Mount Hua sect, she had luxuries spilling out of every corner of her existence. Fine silks, rare delicacies, and a breathtaking view of the floating gardens were just the tip of the proverbial iceberg. She never lacked for anything except, perhaps, the thrill of it all. An older adopted brother had taken on the burden of being heir, leaving her free to meander through life like an aimless breeze. People often called this freedom a gift. Serafina thought it felt more like wandering through a museum where all the exhibits were labeled, "Do not touch." It wasn't that she hated her life. There was nothing to hate, really. But that was precisely the problem. Her days were so polished, so meticulously curated, that there wasn't a speck of grit to be found anywhere. The endless ceremonial dinners, the training that everyone assumed she excelled at because how could a princess not? And the hollow flattery, all of it wrapped her up in a cocoon of monotony. Life was a perfectly balanced equation, and that made it unbearably dull. Class had, at first, seemed like more of the same. It was the exclusive class for prodigies, filled with individuals whose family trees dripped with power and influence. The chatter in the hallways was all about the future this and the destined that. But as Serafina sat in her usual spot, silently observing the others from behind an aura of detached serenity, she realized something was different here. The people, while equally privileged, weren't boring. No, they were sharp edges and jagged lines that didn't quite fit the mold society had made for them. And Serafina, who prided herself on her indifference to most things, found herself leaning in. Her gaze often drifted to Lucifer windward. The so-called second hero had an air of inevitability about him, as though greatness was his birthright. His verdant eyes and noble demeanor made him look like the protagonist of some grand story, and his drive to grow stronger was palpable. Serafina thought he might finally be the one to break her ennui. She watched him closely, waiting for something extraordinary. But while he was impressive, he was also predictable. Strong, determined, and exactly what you'd expect of someone with his title. And then there was Arthur Nightingale. He wasn't the loudest in the room, nor did he command attention like Lucifer, but there was something about him, something unspoken and unpredictable. He had a way of making the world around him bend, just slightly, in ways that didn't quite make sense. It was subtle at first, but Serafina noticed. She always noticed. Things grew more interesting when Rachel Creighton entered the picture. The destined saintess was kind in a way that should have been sickly sweet, but somehow wasn't. Rachel's kindness was genuine, and Serafina found herself oddly fascinated by her. More than that, though, she was drawn to the interactions between Rachel and Arthur. There was a spark there, something unspoken yet undeniable. For the first time in a long while, Seraphine's lips curled into a small, amused smile. Then Cecilia Slatemark appeared, and the whole dynamic shifted. Bold, teasing, and unapologetically herself, Cecilia brought an entirely different energy. Watching her clash with Rachel and Arthur felt like witnessing a storm brewing. The chemistry, the tension, the chaos, it was everything Serafina had been waiting for. She leaned back in her seat, watching the three of them, as though they were a particularly thrilling drama. The perfect balance of chaos and unpredictability had finally arrived. For once, Serafina wasn't bored, and for her, that was more than enough. Serafina sat quietly at her table, her tea untouched, watching the scene unfold with the kind of detached amusement one might reserve for a mildly entertaining holographic drama. Arthur Nightingale was, once again, the center of attention. Not because he wanted to be, no. Arthur never seemed to seek attention, but because it had an irritating habit of finding him anyway. Today's spectacle featured the two princesses, Rachel and Cecilia, locked in yet another argument. They weren't exactly fighting over Arthur, but they weren't exactly not fighting over him either. The details didn't matter. What mattered was that everyone in the cafe was watching the scene with rapt attention, whispering amongst themselves like extras in a poorly written soap opera. "Man, he's so lucky," someone murmured from the table next to Serafina. She ignored the comment but felt the faint urge to roll her eyes. Lucky? Hardly. If anything, Arthur's situation was less luck and more consequence. People mistook his calm demeanor and clever maneuvers for serendipity. But Serafina knew better. Arthur wasn't just lucky. He was annoyingly competent, a genius, really. Not the kind of genius that memorized ancient spell formulas or achieved perfect combat form, but the sort that seemed to play chess while everyone else was figuring out how to open the box. She sighed softly as the crowd in the cafe began to thin out, the drama losing its audience as students returned to their equally unremarkable lives. Rachel and Cecilia, however, were still bickering with the kind of intensity that suggested neither of them would leave until they thoroughly exhausted the subject or each other. Arthur, with the slyness of someone who had clearly done this before, took the moment to slip away. It wasn't a grand escape, more of a quiet sidestep into freedom. "Hey, Serafina," Arthur said as he approached her table, his smile both casual and slightly self-aware, like someone who knew exactly how absurd his life had become but wasn't about to complain. Serafina blinked, acknowledging him with a small nod. Her sharp gaze flicked over his face for a moment as a thought crossed her mind. Is he handsome? She wondered absently. Compared to Lucifer Windward, the golden boy of the academy, probably not. But in the grand scheme of things, definitely top tier. "Are you escaping?" she asked, her tone as direct as ever. Arthur paused, caught off guard by her bluntness, before rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly. "Yeah," he admitted. "Puppet master," Serafina muttered under her breath as she stood, her words barely audible, but carrying just enough weight to reach his ears. "I disagree," Arthur replied, not even bothering to look back as he walked away. Serafina watched him go, a small smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. She wasn't entirely sure if Arthur's life was a comedy, a tragedy, or some chaotic blend of the two. But whatever it was far more interesting than the hollow perfection she was used to. And for now, that was enough to keep her watching. Chapter 72, Prelude to Midterms. The midterms loomed on the horizon like an ominous storm cloud, casting a shadow over every student's nerves. Whispers about the written exam's merciless gauntlets theory, Monod equations, and historical trivia buzzed through the corridors. But it wasn't the written exams that truly terrified anyone. No, the real nightmare lay in the practical evaluation, a beast of its own making, carrying a staggering 70% of the weight in determining our rank. Nero, ever the master of calm yet somehow soul-crushing announcements, stood before the class with his usual air of effortless authority. For the midterms, he began, his voice as smooth as polished steel. "We will be conducting a non-elimination battle royale. No beasts this time." The room stiffened. No beasts. That meant one thing. Every threat on the battlefield would have a human face. Essentially, Nero continued, clasping his hands behind his back. "It's the same as your first practical evaluation minus the fang's claws and snarling wildlife. Points are your currency, as always, but this time, the only way to accumulate them is by hunting other students." Hunting, a charming choice of words, as though this were some light-hearted game of tag and not a calculated free-for-all designed to separate the strong from the faint of heart. Nero smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes and only made you question your life choices. "Not all students are worth the same amount of points," he went on. "The value assigned to each of you has been predetermined by the academy. And pay attention to this, the more students you hunt, the more your point value inflates. Think of it as a bounty system. The higher your score, the more you're worth to everyone else." The implications settled over us like a lead blanket. Hunting wasn't just about gaining points, it was about becoming a target. The better you did, the harder the rest of the trial would become. A perfectly designed, upward spiraling nightmare. "And if you're taken down by another student," Nero added, his voice pleasant in a way that somehow made it worse, "you lose all the points you've accumulated. They'll be transferred to the one who defeated you. You'll revert to your base value." A faint murmur rippled through the room. It wasn't outrage. It wasn't even fear. It was the grim realization that this was going to be as ruthless as it sounded. No beasts, no distractions. Just students pitted against one another, their scores and strategies laid bare for all to exploit. Questions, Nero asked, though it was less of an invitation and more of a rhetorical flourish. "Ah, so they're sticking to the script. I thought, my brain clicking into gear as Nero's explanation sank in. The Academy's motives were as transparent as a pane of glass. In the first practical evaluation, most students had done everything in their power to not fight one another. Instead, they'd chased after beasts like children hunting holographic Easter eggs, avoiding confrontation like it carried a particularly nasty disease. On the rare occasion two groups crossed paths, it almost always ended in uneasy truces or impromptu team-ups. This time, the Academy clearly wasn't having it. No beasts, no distractions, no excuses, just students versus students. Because, as any fool with half a brain in this world knew, the greatest threat wasn't from slobbering monsters, it was from things that walked, talked, and plotted as well as you did. The other humanoid species, beasts. Beasts were predictable, humans, and their ilk. Absolutely not. In the novel, Classa had been the prime target during this exact scenario, like a herd of fattened cattle surrounded by hungry wolves. The other classes had ganged up on them with ruthless efficiency, chipping away at their strength until even the so-called elites had fallen. I imagined the same would happen this time. Why wouldn't it? Classa had the biggest bounties and the most egos to bruise. It practically painted a target on your back the moment you stepped into the field. And then there's the ranking, I thought, my mind ticking forward like a finely tuned clock. This was the first evaluation that truly mattered. The previous practicals had been warm-ups, amuse-bouches to whet the Academy's appetite. Sure, my performance in those had temporarily earned me the top spot on the leaderboard, but that was just window dressing. Officially, I was still rank 8 midterms, however, with a great decider. 70% of the weight in determining rank. In this world, that was the difference between being a hero or a nobody. In the novel, Arthur Nightingale hadn't fared well. He'd been outmaneuvered, outgunned, and ultimately outdone. By the end of the midterms, he'd lost rank 8 and had been unceremoniously kicked out of Classa, replaced by Luke Orden, the current rank 9. Arthur had faded into obscurity after that, his name forgotten in the dust of more dazzling stars. But that wasn't going to happen to me. No, thank you. I wasn't the Arthur Nightingale of the novel, stumbling through the chaos like a deer in a plasma storm. I was stronger, sharper, and far more aware of what was coming. The whole fade into obscurity narrative. Not on my watch. Still, strength wasn't the only factor here. My goal wasn't just survival. It was domination. I needed to climb as high as I could to cement my position at the top, not just for the rankings, but for what they symbolized. In this world, power wasn't just a matter of pride, it was survival currency. So you just want us to fight each other? Cecilia asked, raising an eyebrow with the kind of skepticism only she could pull off. Lucifer will just take out most of them himself, then. A ripple of unease moved through the room, but Nero seemed completely unbothered, as though the prospect of Lucifer single-handedly dominating a battlefield was a particularly dull footnote in his lecture. That is a possibility, of course, he said, his tone calm and measured. But you're forgetting one key detail, stamina. While the students who are knocked out will recover and be teleported back into play within an hour, even Lucifer will run out of energy eventually. Lucifer, standing near the back with his usual quiet intensity, didn't so much as flinch. He didn't argue, either. He simply crossed his arms, a subtle gesture that could have meant anything but somehow communicated agreement. Nero's words were undeniable. No matter how strong Lucifer was, he wasn't a perpetual motion machine. Nero let the silence hang for a moment before he added, almost as an afterthought, "There's also something extra this time." The room collectively leaned forward, curiosity overtaking caution. "There will be a neutral ground in the center of the island," Nero explained, pacing with deliberate slowness. "A zone you can enter to gain 10,000 points instantly, no strings attached." That, of course, was a lie. There were always strings. Everyone in the room knew it. "You'll be on the island for just 24 hours, Nero continued, ignoring the growing murmurs of speculation. Plenty of time to test your endurance, strategy, and, of course, your ability to fend off every other lunatic trying to claim that sweet bounty in the middle. He paused to glance at the clock, his tone shifting to something lighter, but no less dangerous. And before anyone gets too excited about the practical evaluation, let me remind you, this will take place after the written exams. Your grades still matter. Don't think you can scrape by on brute force alone. The reminder was about as welcome as a thunderstorm at a picnic, but Nero delivered it with the kind of finality that made arguing pointless. He stopped pacing and gave the class one last look, his sharp eyes scanning the room as if daring someone to raise a hand and question his judgment. No one did. The stakes were set, the rules were clear, and the promise of chaos hung thick in the air. Chapter 73, Midterms 1. As promised, Professor Nero began the midterms with the theory exams, that delightful exercise in brain torture disguised as education. The first set of papers was handed out with an almost ceremonial solemnity, and the room quickly descended into a reverent, paper-rustling, pen-scratching silence. The questions were, as expected, pure sadism, monotheory, check, political science, of course, beast analysis, naturally, and not the straightforward list three species kind of questions either. No, these were the kind that demanded you understand not just the material but the very depths of the writer's cruel, creative soul. They didn't want answers, they wanted revelations. The answer is simple, Luna's voice whispered in my mind, her tone unhelpfully smug. Then tell me, I muttered internally, bracing for some miraculous insight. I can't tell you everything. You won't grow that way, she hummed, managing to sound both teasing and condescending at once. Then why bother saying anything at all? I snapped back mentally, gritting my teeth as I stared at the question that had reduced me to this internal dialogue. Somewhere in the background, someone sighed loudly, their frustration audible in the otherwise silent room. The clock ticked on, dragging us through a marathon of beast behavior, political maneuvers, and monoflow dynamics. I found myself flipping through mental pages of textbooks, cursing every word I'd skimmed instead of read. Still, I pushed forward. Preparation and sheer stubbornness carried me through, one agonizing question at a time. Finally, after what felt like 3 decades and a minor existential crisis, the first set of exams ended. I dropped my pen, leaning back in my chair with a groan that I tried to keep internal but didn't quite succeed. Around me, the classroom was a battlefield of slumped shoulders, pale faces, and the occasional glazed stare of someone contemplating alternative career options. Well done, everyone, Professor Nero said, his voice managing to be both congratulatory and faintly mocking. Take a short break before we move on to the next set. I sank further into my chair, hoping it might swallow me entirely before the second round began. That was so much fun, Rachel chirped from across the room, her bright smile positively glowing with enthusiasm. Normally, that smile would have made my heart skip a beat. Today, it barely registered as my brain struggled to reboot. Fun, Ren turned to her, his purple eyes wide with something between disbelief and betrayal. In what world are those questions fun, woman? His voice rose with every syllable, until he was practically shouting. The class collectively winced, some of us more dramatically than others. Even Ren's losing it, I thought, somewhat comforted by the sight of the normally calm martial artist looking like he was one wrong word away from snapping entirely. Don't blame me just because you didn't study, Rachel pouted, folding her arms in mock indignation. This is the level of questions we should have every test. Shut up, Ren yelled, clawing at his hair like he'd just survived a battlefield flashback. It was, admittedly, a bit much, but I couldn't exactly blame him. This was uncharted academic hell for all of us. It was tough. Cecilia chimed in, her crimson eyes sparkling with a mix of exhaustion and amusement. But fair. Study more next time, Ren. I snorted, catching Ian out of the corner of my eye. He looked like he'd seen the grim specter of death itself, or perhaps just the beast analysis section. Even Serafina, normally stoic and composed, had the faintest crease in her brow, a subtle sign of her frustration. The only people who seemed unbothered were Rachel, Cecilia, and Jen, who looked like they'd strolled through the exam as though it were a scenic park. "I think I've aged 10 years, Ian muttered, his face pale and voice shaky. "It was brutal," Serafina agreed, her tone calm but lacking its usual impenetrable composure. "But it's done. We just need to get through the next set." Lucifer finally spoke, his voice steady but less confident than usual. "We can handle it. We've trained for worse." He sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else, which was mildly terrifying. If Lucifer was rattled, what hope did the rest of us have? "It just means my perfect scores will be even more impressive," Rachel muttered, clearly thinking no one would hear. But in a room full of enhanced senses, that sort of comment was practically an announcement. Ren twitched. Ian turned to her with the look of a man on the edge of despair. Rachel's face turned red as she slumped in her chair. "Sorry," she mumbled. Our break ended too quickly, and we were thrust into the second round of exams. If the first set had been brutal, the second was positively sadistic. The questions were labyrinthine, designed to strip away every ounce of confidence we had left. By the end, even Rachel's boundless optimism seemed slightly subdued, though I suspected it was more out of pity for the rest of us than any personal struggle. Lucifer rubbed his temples as we gathered in the lounge after the exams, his usual composure frayed at the edges. These theory exams were something else. "Brutal," Ren said, slumping into a chair like he'd just run a marathon. I thought I was prepared. I wasn't. "My brain is still on fire," Ian added, staring blankly at the ceiling. I didn't know it was possible to think that hard. Rachel, ever the optimist, tried to cheer everyone up. "At least it's over now. We did our best, and that's what matters." The words were nice, but the lingering despair in the room suggested we were all contemplating the same thing. The practical evaluation might be terrifying. But at least it didn't involve another pen for now. That was comfort enough. "Hey, Rats, how well do you think you did?" I asked, pulling her aside from the others, who still looked like survivors of a battlefield, staring into the middle distance as though trying to remember what happiness felt like. Rachel scratched her cheek, the faintest hint of sheepishness creeping into her usual sunny demeanor. "Well, I think I did okay," she said. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. "Okay, sure." And the sun was a bit bright. Rachel Creighton was a walking academic nuke, effortlessly dropping perfect scores even at Mythos Academy, the most cutthroat institution in the world. She wasn't just good at exams, she was the reason exams had self-esteem issues. "Well, if you did just okay, I hope you don't lose to me again, Ray Ray," came Cecilia's unmistakable voice, laced with mischief as she joined us out of nowhere. She brushed against my shoulder in that casual, entirely too calculated way she had, and I instinctively stepped back, giving her a wide berth. Cecilia tilted her head, her ruby-red eyes locking onto mine as her finger grazed her bottom lip in a mock thoughtful gesture. Then came the wink, a small, playful dagger aimed with unerring precision. She's such a tease, I thought, grimacing as memories of her past antics surfaced uninvited. How does a princess even learn to be this insufferable? Was it a required class? Teasing 101? "I've never lost to you," Rachel said, her usual brightness dimmed as her eyes narrowed dangerously at Cecilia. Cecilia giggled, the picture of unrepentant amusement. "Haha, sure. But I'm pretty sure that last time we video called, I caught you on your B." Cecilia, Rachel's scream could have shattered glass. Her face turned a shade of red that I hadn't thought was biologically possible as she slapped her hands over Cecilia's mouth mid-sentence. Then she turned to me, her blush somehow intensifying. If cheeks could combust, hers were probably nearing ignition. "Is she a tomato?" I thought, trying not to laugh as her trembling betrayed her utter mortification. "Cecilia Slatemark," Rachel growled, her voice low and menacing. "Die." "Wait, Saintess." "Mercy." Cecilia managed to get out before Rachel's golden mana flared to life like sunlight condensed into fury. There wasn't even a proper fight. One moment Cecilia was standing there, laughing like she had just pulled off the world's funniest prank, and the next she crumpled to the ground, unconscious. A hush fell over the nearby students as they turned to look at Rachel, who stood as still as a statue, her hands clenched at her sides. She seemed to realize what she'd done only after several long seconds of silence. Slowly, she turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of embarrassment and the kind of intensity that made my survival instincts kick in. "Arthur," she said, her voice unnervingly steady but trembling at the edges, "wipe this moment from your memory." "Yes," I replied immediately, because what else do you say when faced with an embarrassed saintess who could smite you into oblivion? Without another word, she spun on her heel and bolted, leaving behind a faint golden glow in her wake. The remaining students watched her retreat in stunned silence, unsure whether to laugh, applaud, or run for cover. "Theft," came a small sound from behind me. I turned to see Serafina, sitting calmly at a nearby table, her phone in hand, fingers tapping away. She didn't look up, but her lips were curled into the faintest smirk. Our eyes met, her smile vanished instantly, her face slipping back into its usual stoic mask as though the giggle had been a figment of my imagination. She returned to typing on her phone with the kind of focus that suggested whatever she was doing was far more important than the chaos around her. I looked back at Cecilia, still unconscious on the floor, and Rachel's rapidly retreating form in the distance. I don't know what's going on in this world anymore, I thought, shaking my head as I walked away. Chapter 74, Midterms 2. The midterms began with a drop, quite literally. One moment, I was standing in the Academy's preparation hall, weapon in hand and the faint buzz of anticipation thick in the air. The next, I was plummeting through the sky, the wind screaming past my ears, and the island below rushing up to meet me like it had a personal vendetta. The Academy didn't bother with subtlety. The drop pods they used weren't much more than reinforced capsules with just enough tech to ensure you didn't pancake into the ground. It was all part of the experience, apparently getting you in the right mindset. Because nothing says elite training like a near-death experience before the actual trial even starts. I tightened my grip on my sword, the single weapon we were allowed to bring. No armor, no fancy tools, just the weapon you trusted most and whatever skills you had honed to perfection. Strapped to my belt was the artifact the Academy had provided, a sleek, cylindrical device no bigger than a palm. It hummed faintly with energy, its surface etched with glowing runes. The Academy called it the Evolver, part life-saving gadget, part grim scorekeeper. Its primary function was simple. If you were eliminated, it would teleport you out of danger, initiate a rapid recovery process, and revive you at a designated neutral zone on the island after an hour. It also tallied your points in real time, broadcasting them to a leaderboard only you could see by pressing its surface. Of course, it had its limits. The Evolver wasn't a free pass to go wild. If you were knocked out, you'd lose all the points you'd accumulated, handing them over to whoever had bested you. The stakes weren't just survival, they were humiliation. One mistake, and you'd spend the rest of the day clawing your way back from zero. The capsule rattled violently as it entered the island's atmosphere, the friction and heat adding another layer of discomfort to my already tense nerves. A voice crackled over the comms embedded in the pod walls. Professor Nero, of course, because who else would have the audacity to sound calm at a time like this? "Welcome to the island," he said, his tone as smooth and casual as if he were announcing the lunch menu. "You have 24 hours to accumulate as many points as possible. Remember, the neutral zone at the center is worth a hefty 10,000 points, but it's also highly contested. Choose your battles wisely, and don't forget this isn't just about strength. Strategy, endurance, and intelligence will determine the outcome. Good luck, you'll need it." The pod jolted as it released its parachute, slowing my descent just enough to avoid permanent damage. Through the reinforced glass, I could see the island sprawling beneath me, a lush, green expanse of jagged cliffs, dense forests, and open plains, all carefully designed for chaos. In the distance, the neutral zone shimmered faintly, its golden beacon visible even from this height. It was both a promise and a threat. With a hiss, the pod landed, embedding itself slightly into the soft earth. The door shot open, and I stepped out, weapon in hand, the evolver humming faintly at my side. The air was thick with the scent of greenery and the faint hum of distant wildlife, but I didn't have time to admire the scenery. Somewhere out there, the others had already landed. Some would be hunting, some would be hiding, and some like Lucifer would be making their way straight to the center, daring anyone to stop them. The trial had officially begun. Underscore, Cecilia Slatemark, Cecilia Slatemark, Rachel muttered to herself as she moved, her sapphire eyes scanning the forest ahead like a hawk on the hunt. Her mind was fixed on a single, uncheckable goal during the midterms, to hunt down Cecilia Slatemark, that irritating, insufferable princess of the Slatemark Empire. From the very beginning, Rachel hadn't liked Cecilia. They were opposites in almost every way. Where Rachel was kind and composed, Cecilia was teasing and infuriating. But today, it wasn't just a clash of personalities driving her resolve. No, this was personal. Rachel's cheeks flushed as she clenched her fists. The memory of Cecilia's prank and the fact that she had the audacity to mention it in front of Arthur Nightingale flooding her mind like an unstoppable tide of mortification. Cecilia Slatemark, she growled through gritted teeth. The name itself felt like an offense. She stopped for a moment, raising her chin defiantly and balling her fists. Saintesses can smite evil, she declared aloud, her voice brimming with righteous indignation. So I'm right. Her expression brightened as if she had just proven a profound universal truth. Yes, this was entirely justified. A moral crusade, even. Then a presence, subtle, but there, Rachel spun on her heel. Her expression instantly composed and polite, though her mana subtly flared beneath the surface. "Oh, Your Highness, Rachel," a voice stammered. A boy emerged from the foliage with his hands raised in surrender. "It is I, Morris von Pomflick, son of Marquis Pomflick of the Slatemark Empire." Rachel's sapphire eyes swept over him. Not bad, she thought. Morris von Pomflick, current rank 12, a light yellow ranker. Decent enough, but ultimately not a threat. The gap between their abilities now was as wide as the Grand Canyon on steroids. To his credit, or perhaps his delusion, Morris didn't seem devastated by the disparity. In fact, he looked delighted, radiant, even. Rachel didn't need her gift for reading people to know why. It was written all over his face. "He's happy because he knows I'm kind," she thought, her smile unwavering despite the mild exasperation creeping into her mind. Rachel Creighton and Cecilia Slatemark were similar in one crucial way. Both were exceptional at reading people. But where Cecilia used that talent to manipulate and tease, Rachel wielded hers for entirely different reasons. She used it to protect herself, to navigate the web of expectations and alliances around her, while treating everyone she met with kindness. "Your Highness, let us team up," Morris said, stepping forward confidently, his grin so wide it bordered on presumptuous. Rachel tilted her head, her polite smile never faltering. She said thoughtfully, remembering the point system Professor Nero had explained. Lucifer started with a base of 10,000 points. She, Cecilia, Arthur, and Ren had 1,500 points each as high silver rankers. Serafina, Ian, and Jin sat slightly lower with 1,000 points as mid-silver rankers. And Morris was worth a modest 150 points. "I might have considered it," Rachel said, her tone light and sweet. As if she were discussing the weather, Morris's grin widened. But she continued, her smile sharp as a blade. "You once said something bad about someone I care about." Morris froze, his grin wavered, then collapsed entirely into a look of dawning horror. Before he could stammer out a defense, Rachel raised her finger, pointed it at him like a gun, and mimicked a shot. Bang! Morris screamed a high-pitched sound that did nothing for his dignity as the evolver activated, teleporting him away in a flash of light. Rachel watched her evolver tally the points with a faint hum, her expression serene. Then her cheeks flushed as she muttered to herself, fanning her face with her hand. "I called Arthur precious to me," she realized, her voice barely above a whisper. Her face grew hotter, and she shook her head as if to banish the thought. Focus, she needed to focus. Her eyes hardened as she turned her attention back to the hunt. She wasn't done. She wouldn't be done until she'd found Cecilia Slatemark and taken her points over and over again, if necessary. This wasn't just about rankings anymore. This was justice, divine, Saintess-approved justice, and maybe just a little bit of payback. Chapter 75, Midterms 3. This is a bit toxic, no matter how I look at it, I thought, stepping through the forest and dodging yet another low-hanging branch. The midterms were meant to test our skills and adaptability, sure, but the rules leaned suspiciously in favor of certain individuals. Case in point, Lucifer and his ridiculous 10,000 starting points. I understood the logic make him a giant glowing target so the rest of us could have a go at him. But it also gave him a head start the size of a small moon. He could lose a dozen fights and still end up leading the scoreboard. Then again, as the sole white ranker among the first years, he was in a league of his own. No amount of petty grumbling could change that. Luna, I mentally called out, find me prey. All right, came her smooth, indifferent reply. Even sealed, her senses as a Killen far outstripped mine. It was one of her few perks that didn't come with a side of sarcasm. After a moment, she spoke again, behind you, some distance away. Two girls clashing, want to intervene. I didn't even need to ask who. Pass, I replied. If Rachel and Cecilia were at it, the last thing I wanted was to get caught in the crossfire of their mutual animosity. Whatever that feud was about, I wasn't interested in finding out, at least not up close. Suddenly, a sharp presence brushed against my senses, and I caught sight of a mana arrow hurtling toward my face. I snatched it out of the air, crushing the glowing projectile in my hand as its residual energy fizzled out. Not bad, I thought, impressed by how well the spell had been cloaked. My senses hadn't picked up on it until the last moment. Why didn't you warn me? I asked Luna, who, of course, had probably sensed it well before I did. Didn't feel like it, she replied lazily, as though shrugging in my mind. I sighed. Having a Killen spirit was meant to be an advantage, not an ongoing test of my patience. You survived that. Troublesome, came a voice, light and unbothered. My eyes shifted to see a girl lounging atop a blanket spread out beneath a tree, as though this was some kind of picnic and not a battle royale. If Rachel, Cecilia, and Serafina were the undisputed heroines of this world, towering figures whose potential practically bent the rules of reality, then Clara Lopez was something else entirely. A sub-heroine, if you wanted to get technical. Not quite at their level of narrative importance, but close enough to make you tread carefully. Rank 10, the lazy genius. Clara wasn't in Classa, not because she lacked the skill, but because of special circumstances. Circumstances like the fact that her mother, Radiant Ranker Eva Lopez, was also the headmaster of Mythos Academy. And if that wasn't enough, Clara was the prized disciple of Archmage Charlotte Alaric, the most powerful multi-element mind aspect spellcaster in the world. Which made me wonder why someone like her had just shot at me. I'm more surprised she bothered attacking, I thought, studying her. She looked as she always did, relaxed to the point of absurdity, with an air of practiced indifference that said she could win this fight if she cared enough to try. Her mono rank had been the reason she wasn't placed in class initially, but she'd fixed that in just 4 months by reaching mid-silver rank from light yellow rank. Typical, even her lazy approach to cultivation seemed to work better than most people's discipline. Her multi-element casting was impressive, though, and the arrow, despite being a simple 2-circle spell, had been meticulously executed. That, combined with her subtle control of mana, made her far more dangerous than her rank suggested. Didn't expect you to be so jumpy, Clara continued, yawning slightly as she propped herself up on one elbow. Makes me think this might actually be fun. Her tone was casual, almost bored, but her eyes glimmered with a quiet sharpness that said she was calculating something. What that something was, I wasn't entirely sure. But one thing was clear. Whatever fight she was looking for, I was probably in it now. She brought a blanket, I thought, dodging another arrow of lightning with a mix of disbelief and mild irritation. How is that not blatant favoritism? Did they give her a picnic basket too? Clara, still lounging like this was some casual weekend outing, flicked her fingers, and a new spell materialized instantly. For circles spun into existence, crackling with energy. Thunder shock! The spell roared to life, electricity arcing toward me in a jagged, violent surge. It was efficient, precise, and casually devastating. I felt the hum of its power in my bones. I want to test myself as a spellcaster against her, I thought, the thrill of challenge rising despite myself. With a sharp gesture, fire particles gathered around my hand, the air growing hot and heavy. They swirled and condensed, forming the shape of a spear burning so brightly it left afterimages in its wake. Flame lance. Boom! Not waiting for the dust to settle, I propelled myself upward with a simple 3-circle spell, wind mana surging to my feet and lifting me off the ground. I glided through the air toward Clara, closing the gap between us. How Clara said, her voice tinged with genuine interest as she straightened slightly, "You aren't bad." For her, that was probably the equivalent of a standing ovation. As if to underline her approval, a shimmering robe appeared around her, woven from mana and shifting in colors yellow, green, red, blue, cyan, and purple. Each hue represented one of her elemental affinities, and they danced across the fabric like living flames. Her elemental versatility wasn't just impressive, it was absurd. She shared the same breadth of affinities as Lucifer, which alone would have made her exceptional. But of course, Clara wasn't just any spellcaster. She had a gift. Sorcerers, right? Gifts were humanity's trump cards powers that defied logic and rewrote the rules of magic, physics, and occasionally good manners. Some elements, like light and dark, were naturally opposing forces, and while humans had evolved to wield such contrasts, combining them was another matter entirely. It was like trying to juggle fire and ice without one extinguishing or melting the other. Normally, spellcasters had to navigate a treacherous maze of theory and mana control to balance opposing elements. Clara, however, bypassed all of that with her gift. Sorcerer's Right allowed her to seamlessly blend and wield contrasting elements through her mind aspect, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. It was, in many ways, a counterpart to Lucifer's yin-yang body, which achieved the same effect through the body aspect. Where Lucifer could merge elements like an artist blending paints on a canvas, Clara did it with the precision of a composer conducting a symphony. The battlefield around us reflected her skill. The air buzzed with the electricity, swirled with wind, and shimmered with traces of water vapor and flame. It was like standing in the eye of a technicolor storm. Meanwhile, my fire burned fiercely in defiance of her overwhelming elemental mastery. The clash wasn't just about spells anymore. It was about who could impose their will on the battlefield. Clara smiled faintly, her posture relaxed, but her eyes sharp. "So, Arthur Nightingale," she said, her voice calm but tinged with the thrill of a predator sensing a worthy opponent. "Let's see how far you can go." Challenge accepted. Chapter 76, Midterms 4. Clara's robe of shifting elements flared as she cast another spell, this time weaving fire and water together in a way that shouldn't have been possible. The result was a roaring steam explosion that surged toward me, a boiling mix of scalding vapor and raw force. I countered quickly, summoning a wall of wind with a 3-circle spell to disperse the steam. The barrier held, but barely. The sheer complexity of her attacks was forcing me to think faster and act smarter with each passing moment. "Not bad," Clara said, her tone carrying the same lazy amusement as before, though her movements were anything but sluggish. She flicked her wrist, and two new spells formed in tandem, one a spiraling vortex of wind, the other a sharp, crackling spear of lightning. They shot toward me in perfect sync. I cast Flame Lance again, this time aiming it to intercept the lightning spear. The fire and electricity clashed violently, sparks and embers scattering across the battlefield. At the same time, I used a burst of wind to dodge the vortex. landing with a roll just out of its range. Despite the fact that I was high silver rank to her mid-silver rank, her gift more that closed gap. Her spells were calculated and layered, each one forcing me to respond in a way that left me open to the next. I retaliated with a 4-circle fire spell, Inferno Wave, sending a scorching arc of flames surging toward her. She didn't even flinch, raising her hand and conjuring a wall of water that swallowed the flames whole. The steam hissed and evaporated, leaving the battlefield momentarily shrouded in a thick mist. "You're slipping," Clara said, her voice coming from somewhere in the fog. "I thought you'd put up more of a fight, given your rank. Maybe I overestimated you." I gritted my teeth, ignoring the taunt. She wasn't wrong, I was losing ground. Her gift, Sorcerer's Right, was turning this into a battle of creativity and control, not raw power. And in that department, she was leagues ahead. But there was one thing she'd underestimated: my ability to think on my feet. "All right, let's change the game," I thought. As Clara's silhouette appeared through the mist, weaving another spell, I activated Loosen Harmony. The air around me shimmered with a faint golden glow as I tapped into the precise, disciplined flow of light mana. She noticed immediately. Her eyes narrowed as she finished casting a 5-circle spell of her own, a crackling web of lightning that spread out across the ground like a trap, forcing me to keep my distance. "You've got something up your sleeve, huh?" she said, her voice a mix of curiosity and caution. "Something like that," I replied, focusing my mana into a single, concentrated point. Light spells were all about precision, and this one had to count. I poured everything into the casting, forming a 5-circle light spell, Radiant Spear. The glowing spear of pure light took shape above me, radiating heat and power as it hummed with concentrated energy. Clara's expression shifted, the casual amusement giving way to genuine surprise. "Wait," she started, but it was too late. I unleashed the spear, sending it hurtling toward her at blinding speed. Clara's instincts kicked in, and she threw up a shield of combined wind and earth mana, but it wasn't enough. The radiant spear pierced through, shattering the barrier and exploding in a flash of golden light. When the dust settled, Clara was lying flat on her back, her robe of elemental mana flickering faintly as she groaned. Her evolver hummed softly, tallying her points and transferring them to me. "I knew I shouldn't have agreed to this fight," she muttered, shielding her eyes from the sunlight as she sat up. "I swear, every time I try to have fun, it bites me in the ass." I stepped forward, catching my breath, the faint hum of the evolver at my hip reminding me that I'd secured the win. Clara's own evolver activated with a low, mechanical hum as the tally began. A soft light enveloped her, numbers flickering briefly in the air. 1,000 points. The confirmation appeared on my own evolver screen, the points transferring to me seamlessly. I exhaled slowly, my grip on the lingering traces of my light mana finally relaxing. Clara Lopez, mid-silver rank, worth 1,000 points. Not bad at all. And with that, she vanished, her evolver completing the teleport and leaving nothing behind but a faint wisp of mana and the smell of singed grass. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where she'd been. Something about this didn't sit right. Clara wasn't the type to pick random fights, not even during the midterms. Her laid-back nature made her unlikely to seek out challenges unless there was something or someone behind it. Who could have put her up to this, I wondered, the thought nagging at the back of my mind. Clara's comments had been flippant, but there was always an undercurrent of truth buried in her teasing. Maybe she had been testing me for herself, or maybe someone else had nudged her in my direction. Either way, it didn't feel random. Underscore? Meanwhile, deep within the forest, two blurs of crimson and gold darted through the canopy, clashing with enough force to send shockwaves rippling through the trees. Birds scattered, leaves burned, and the unfortunate squirrels who had made this part of the forest their home probably reconsidered every life choice that had led them there. "Ray Ray, are you that mad at me?" Cecilia called out, her voice laced with mock concern as a shimmering crimson shield sprang into existence in front of her, effortlessly deflecting a barrage of light rays that Rachel hurled her way. Cecilia Slatemark, Rachel snapped, her voice ringing out like divine judgment. For daring to say that, I will kill you. Ah, but what did I even do? Cecilia replied, her tone infuriatingly sweet as she pressed her palms together. Crimson mana crackled around her fingers before exploding outward, conjuring dozens of spears that hovered ominously in the air. Except, as usual with Cecilia's magic, these weren't just ordinary spears. No, these were chaos-infused monstrosities, their power and speed utterly random, as though even the laws of mana themselves couldn't decide what they were supposed to do. Cecilia smirked as she launched the chaotic barrage. Wait, I know what this is about. It's because Arthur almost found out your embarrassing little secret, isn't it? Right? Rachel's face froze into a mask of icy fury, her wings flaring behind her as golden feathers materialized in the air. With a flick of her wrist, the feathers shot forward, precise and glowing, slicing through Cecilia's unpredictable spears like they were paper mache. This is dangerous, Cecilia admitted under her breath, her eyes narrowing as she exhaled onto her palm. Flames blossomed instantly, wrapping around her hand before spreading outward, forming a blazing defense that scorched the incoming feathers to ash. No secret, Rachel shouted, her voice carrying the weight of righteous indignation. You pranked me. With a flash of light, she reappeared behind Cecilia, a massive golden hammer now in her hands. It radiated holy mana, glowing with an intensity that could have made lesser mortals rethink their life choices. Oh, you have to be kidding me, Cecilia screeched, twisting her body just in time to narrowly avoid the hammer's downward swing. The sheer force of it cratered the ground beneath them, sending debris flying. What kind of saintess smashes people with a goddamn hammer? Evil? You're evil, Rachel yelled, her voice high with fury as she swung the hammer again, her wings propelling her forward with terrifying speed. Cecilia grimaced, summoning her crimson mana into her left hand. It crackled and twisted, shaping itself into a wicked-looking pitchfork that glimmered ominously. With a yell of effort, she brought it up just in time to meet Rachel's hammer head-on. Boom! The two weapons collided, releasing a shockwave that rippled through the forest, uprooting shrubs and sending nearby trees swaying precariously. For a moment, neither girl moved, their weapons locked in a tense standoff, sparks of mana flying in every direction. Thank God you don't know how to swing properly, Cecilia muttered under her breath, her muscles straining as she fought against the overwhelming force of Rachel's hammer. Rachel's eyes glowed with golden light as she pressed forward, the weight of her resolve as heavy as the hammer itself. You will repent, she yelled, her tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. Cecilia, despite the dire situation, couldn't help but smirk. Repent? For what? For being right? Rachel's furious growl echoed through the forest as the clash intensified, neither girl willing to give an inch. It wasn't a battle of strategy or cunning, it was pure chaos. And in a way, that made it all the more dangerous. Chapter 77, Midterms 5. So, what do you think? Luna asked, her tone carrying the faint amusement of someone who already knew the answer. You couldn't pay me enough to step into that, I replied, glancing back at the chaos unfolding in the clearing. Rachel's golden feathers were tearing through Cecilia's chaos spears, and somewhere in the middle of all that light and crimson, Cecilia's scream about hammers and saintesses echoed through the trees. Rachel smiting Cecilia in her self-declared holy crusade. They could have all the fun they wanted without me. I turned and walked away, eager to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever fresh madness they were creating. But of course, the universe wasn't about to let me off that easily. You've got to be kidding me, I muttered as I stopped in my tracks. The air shifted, heavy and oppressive, signaling the presence of someone dangerous. And then I heard the voice. Arthur Nightingale, it said, calm yet cutting, like a blade drawn across stone, the commoner who sullied Class A. I turned to face the speaker, and there he was, Ren Kagi, white hair catching the sunlight, his violet eyes glowing faintly. He stood like an artist preparing to critique an unfinished painting. Ren, I said, gripping my sword instinctively. Official rank 2, temporary rank 3, a prodigy whose name carried as much weight as his fists. The direct descendant of Liam Kagu, the first hero, and the inheritor of terrifying talent. This wasn't going to be a spar. This was a trial by fire, and one I couldn't afford to take lightly. Ren tilted his head slightly, the faintest trace of a smirk tugging at his lips. Well, at least you raised your sword. That's something. And then he moved. The ground cracked beneath him as he launched forward, his fist aiming for my face with the kind of speed that made the air itself recoil. I raised my blade to block, but his violet eyes tracked the movement with terrifying precision. He shifted mid-strike, angling his fist toward my chest instead. I adjusted, pulling my blade back just in time to intercept. The clash sent a shockwave rippling through the trees, and I was forced back a step, my feet digging into the earth to steady myself. Not bad, Ren said, his voice calm as ever. His eyes gleamed with an unsettling focus. He wasn't just looking at me. He was analyzing everything: my stance, my movements, the flow of my mana. That was the power of his gift, God's eyes. Unlike Lucifer's overwhelming yin-yang body, Ren's gift was surgical, methodical. It saw through everything. Luna, I thought as I steadied myself, I'm going to need you. About time, she replied, her tone as cool as ever. I activated Lucent Harmony. Golden energy pulsed through me, faint but potent, connecting me to the full spectrum of all 11 elements. The air around me shimmered as the technique awakened the potential to draw on elements I otherwise couldn't use. I didn't hesitate. I tapped into wind mana first, reinforcing my agility as I moved to counter Ren's next strike. He noticed immediately, his smirk growing slightly wider. Interesting. So you do have something worth showing. He shifted again, his stance changing subtly as black energy began to swirl around his fists. The air around him grew heavier, darker, as though space itself was bending to his will. Grade 6 Art Void Fist, first movement, collapsing step. Ren vanished. One moment he was in front of me, and the next, the space he occupied rippled faintly, distorting like the surface of water. Instinct kicked in as I spun around, wind mana accelerating my movements. He reappeared behind me, his fist aimed directly at my back. I brought my sword up in a sweeping arc, channeling aura through it as I engaged the first steps of my Tempest dance technique. The strike wasn't just about raw power, it was about building momentum, layering each successive hit to amplify the strength of the next. Sparks flew as my blade met his fist, the clash sending a sharp vibration up my arm. Ren's expression didn't waver. If anything, he looked more amused. You're building power. Not bad for a grade 5 art, but that won't be enough. He pressed forward, unleashing another strike with collapsing step, forcing me onto the defensive. Each of his attacks felt like a collapsing star, compact and devastating. I countered with quick, precise strikes, layering my Tempest dance technique as best I could, each swing of my sword growing heavier, faster, more forceful. But it wasn't enough. Ren's grade 6 art outpaced mine at every turn. His attacks were relentless, his movements flawless, and his God's eyes ensured that he was always a step ahead. I could feel the gap between us widening with every exchange. He moved again, this time faster, his aura surging as he transitioned into the second movement of Void Fist, Event Horizon. The air around him warped, compressing into a sphere of crushing pressure. My instincts screamed at me to move, but the pull of the technique was suffocating. I reached for light mana through Lucent Harmony, conjuring a brilliant flare that exploded outward, temporarily disrupting his attack. The light forced Ren to pause for half a second, a window so small it barely existed. But it was enough. I channeled the built-up momentum of my Tempest dance technique, my blade surging forward with amplified force. It wasn't enough to overwhelm him, but it disrupted his rhythm, forcing him to retreat slightly. Ren stopped, his breathing steady but his expression sharper now. Interesting, he said, brushing dust off his sleeve. You're not bad, Arthur, but you're still out of your depth. I didn't reply, keeping my focus sharp as my mana pulsed faintly around me. This wasn't over. Not yet. Ren stood there, calm and poised, like an artist critiquing his own masterpiece. His violet eyes, glowing faintly, locked onto me, dissecting every movement I made. He wasn't just fighting me, he was breaking me down, piece by piece. Every swing of my sword, every shift in my stance, was met with a counter that felt maddeningly precise. My Tempest dance technique was building momentum, each successive strike layering power into the next. But Ren's Grade 6 art, Void Fist, outclassed it. He wasn't just blocking or dodging, he was dismantling my rhythm entirely. He's too fast, I thought, my breath coming in shorter bursts. I had to find a way to disrupt him to force him into a position where even his god's eyes couldn't save him. Struggling, Ren asked, his voice casual, almost bored. His aura flickered around him, faint but suffocating, like the calm before a storm. Your art is good, but not good enough. You're playing catch up, Arthur. I ignored the taunt, my mind racing. I needed to break his tempo, but he was already predicting my next move before I even made it. My usual tricks wouldn't work here. Luna, I called out, my grip tightening on my sword. Any ideas? You're stalling, she replied, her voice sharp. Use Lucent Harmony. You have access to all 11 elements. Stop fighting him like he's someone you can outpace. Overwhelm him. She was right. I couldn't match him with pure technique. I needed something faster, stronger, decisive move that even his god's eyes couldn't track in time. As Ren shifted, preparing for another movement of his Void Fist, I felt the opening. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. A slight hesitation in his stance, the faintest delay as he gathered mana for his next strike. Now, I thought. I activated Lucent Harmony, drawing mana from lightning and light simultaneously. My aura flared, golden and crackling with energy. As the spell began to take shape, this wasn't just any spell. It was God Flash, my signature technique, elevated into a 5-circle variant for this battle. The air around me crackled, charged with electricity, as the light mana condensed into a searing, blinding point of pure energy. The spell's brilliance lit up the battlefield, casting sharp shadows through the trees. Ren's eyes narrowed, his god's eyes already reading the movements of the spell. I see it, he muttered, shifting his stance, but I vanished. The speed of God Flash was unparalleled, a burst of light and lightning mana that propelled me forward faster than the eye could track. Even with his god's eyes, Ren couldn't react in time. He moved to intercept, but I was already there, my sword striking true. The collision sent a shockwave rippling outward, the force of the spell breaking through Ren's defenses. His aura faltered, and he stumbled back, his expression tight with frustration. He straightened, breathing hard, his violet eyes meeting mine with a rare mix of respect and irritation. So that's your play, he said, his tone still calm, but edged with defeat. Even with God's eyes, I couldn't follow it fast enough. The evolver at his side hummed softly, tallying the points before activating its teleportation process. A faint glow surrounded him as the device confirmed my gain. 3,000 points. I stood there, catching my breath as the display on my own evolver updated. Ren had collected 1,500 points already, bringing my total to 6,000. It was a massive boost, but the fight had taken everything I had to secure it. Before teleporting away, Ren gave me a faint smile, his usual composure returning. You won this time, Arthur, but next time, I'll see even faster. And he was gone, the forest falling eerily silent in his absence. I exhaled slowly, the adrenaline fading as I sheathed my sword. The echoes of the battle still lingered, but I couldn't let myself dwell on it. Good job, Luna said, her tone slightly warmer than usual. Thanks, I thought, rolling my eyes, but even as I moved to leave the battlefield, my mind was already on the next fight. With every point I gained, I became a bigger target. And if Ren was this tough, I couldn't even imagine what was waiting for me next. Chapter 78, Midterm 6. I barely had time to catch my breath, my body still buzzing with the aftermath of the fight with Ren. My evolver quietly displayed my updated score, the 3,000 points from defeating him feeling heavier than they should. Every point was a double-edged sword, drawing more attention, more predators. And then I heard the crunch of leaves, the unmistakable shuffle of multiple feet approaching. I sighed, of course. It's never quiet for long, is it? Arthur Nightingale, a voice called out, full of mockery and disdain. Stepping out from the shadows was Morris von Pomflick, flanked by his group of opportunists. His smug grin was practically dripping with superiority, as if he'd already won. The commoner sullying class, what a sad sight. You've got to be kidding me, I thought, gripping my sword tighter. I was tired, my body still aching from the clash with Ren, and now I had to deal with this lot. Morris's gang spread out, surrounding me. There were 4 of them, each grinning like hyenas circling a wounded animal. None of them were particularly strong, but together, and with me this drained, they could pose a real problem. Well, isn't this a scene? Morris continued, his tone dripping with amusement. Arthur Nightingale, the great commoner, looking a little worse for wear. Yes, fighting above your station takes a toll. Ha! I didn't reply, my gaze darting between them, looking for openings. Talking wouldn't help here. Morris's sneer widened as he mistook my silence for fear. You know, people like you shouldn't be in class, Morris said, stepping closer, his mana flaring faintly. Class is for nobles, people with lineage, prestige, you. You're just a fluke. The others laughed, feeding off his arrogance. Yeah, how does it feel to be out of your depth, Nightingale? One of them taunted. You're just a placeholder, another added. Someone else more deserving will take your spot soon enough. My grip tightened on my sword, but my body protested even the idea of another fight. I was running on fumes, and they knew it. My silence only seemed to embolden them further. Well, I suppose this is where your lucky streak ends, Morris said, mana gathering in his hands. I'll make sure to put those points of yours to better use. It's only fair, after all. I prepared myself for the worst, digging deep for whatever energy I could muster to fend them off. But before Morris could attack, a familiar voice cut through the tension like a blade. Morris von Pomflick, Rachel said, her tone dangerously calm. What do you think you're doing? The group froze as Rachel descended from above, golden mana radiating from her wings like a beacon. She landed with the grace of someone who absolutely knew she was in control of the situation. Behind her, crimson mana flickered as Cecilia stepped out of the shadows, her mischievous smile giving way to something far sharper. Well, Cecilia said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness, picking on Arthur when he's tired. Morris, that's low, even for you. Morris faltered, his mana flickering as the 2 girls advanced. We're just. Settling a score, he stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating. He doesn't belong in Classa. Enough, Rachel interrupted, her sapphire eyes narrowing. Arthur belongs where he's earned his place, unlike you. Morris took a step back, his face turning red as he tried to summon some semblance of dignity. You're defending him. A commoner. You're a Creighton. What would your family? Rachel's golden feathers flared, cutting him off mid-sentence. Her voice was steady, but the edge in it was impossible to miss. Arthur is more worthy of Classa than you will ever be, Morris. Now leave, before I make you. Cecilia stepped forward, crimson mana swirling around her like a storm. You heard her. Run along, Morris, unless you want to see what happens when a slate mark gets serious. Morris's gang exchanged nervous glances. They weren't stupid. Facing me was one thing tired, outnumbered, but Rachel and Cecilia. Even they knew better than to take on 2 of the most powerful first years head-on. This isn't over, Morris muttered, his bravado slipping as he gestured for his lackeys to follow. They disappeared into the trees, their presence fading quickly as they retreated. I exhaled, finally letting my shoulders relax. Rachel turned to me, her expression softening. Arthur, are you okay? Just peachy, I said, my voice dry. Thanks for the save. Cecilia smirked, crossing her arms. Well, aren't you lucky we happened to be nearby? Though I'm starting to think we should charge you for these rescues. Rachel rolled her eyes, ignoring Cecilia's teasing. You should rest, Arthur. You've been fighting too much already. As Morris and his gang turned tail, their hurried retreat was marked by muttered curses and bruised egos. It was almost satisfying to watch almost. But apparently, Cecilia had other ideas. Oh no, 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 Cecilia said, her crimson eyes glinting with mischief as she raised her hand, mana swirling around her fingers. We don't just let them leave. That's boring. Cecilia, no, Rachel started, but it was too late. A swarm of chaotic crimson orbs formed around Cecilia, their movements erratic and unpredictable, like fireworks with a grudge. With a flick of her wrist, the orbs shot toward the retreating group. Chaos bombs, Cecilia called out gleefully, as if announcing the winner of a game show. The orbs exploded around Morris and his gang, bursts of crimson energy lighting up the forest. None of them hit directly. Cecilia was annoyingly good at precision. Even with something as chaotic as her magic, but the resulting shockwaves sent the group tumbling over themselves in a comical display of panic. Run faster, one of them screamed, tripping over a root and scrambling to his feet. She's insane, Morris shouted, his face red with both embarrassment and rage as he sprinted away, clutching at his revolver. Cecilia stood there, hands on her hips, looking thoroughly pleased with herself. Now that is a proper goodbye, she said, turning back to us with a satisfied grin. Rachel sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Did you really have to do that? Oh, come on, Ray, Cecilia teased, her tone dripping with mock indignation. You're too soft. You let them walk away after saying all those awful things about Arthur, me? I just helped them rethink their life choices. Consider it a public service. Rachel's cheeks flushed slightly as she glanced at me. They were retreating. It wasn't necessary. Not necessary. Cecilia raised an eyebrow, feigning shock. You're supposed to be a saintess. Aren't you supposed to smite evil or something? You're slipping, Ray. Rachel opened her mouth to retort but closed it again, her cheeks reddening further. I don't smite people for running away, she muttered. Cecilia smirked, leaning in closer. Are you sure about that? Because I distinctly remember someone chasing me with a hammer just a little while ago. Rachel's flush deepened, and she waved her hands in a flustered attempt to change the subject. This is different. I couldn't help but let out a chuckle, which earned me a glare from Rachel and a triumphant grin from Cecilia. You too, Rachel said, exasperated, but there was no real bite in her tone, honestly. Well, Cecilia said, stretching her arms above her head as if she hadn't just bombed a group of students into retreating. Now that that's sorted, Arthur, you owe me big time. Rescues like this don't come cheap. I raised an eyebrow. What? You want me to pay you in points? No, she said with a sly smile, something much more valuable. Like, maybe you owe me a favor. I'll collect later. Rachel huffed. Cecilia, leave him alone. He's had enough for today. Cecilia winked at me, her crimson mana flickering faintly around her fingertips. Fine, for now. I shook my head, a faint smile tugging at my lips despite myself. Exhausted or not, I couldn't deny that having Rachel and Cecilia around had its perks even if one of them seemed determined to cause chaos at every opportunity. Chapter 79, Midterms 7. Anyway, I said, glancing between them, did you two decide not to fight? Or is this just a temporary ceasefire while you plot each other's doom? Rachel and Cecilia exchanged looks. It was the kind of silent communication that only came from years of knowing exactly how much you could annoy someone before they actually snapped. Finally, they both nodded. Yeah, we're equal in strength, so fighting wouldn't benefit either of us, Rachel said primly, though the way her eyes darted toward Cecilia suggested she wasn't entirely done with the idea. Though I still want to smite her. Cecilia shrugged, a picture of unbothered chaos as she flicked a stray leaf from her sleeve. Please, Ray, you shouldn't be so mad about what I did. I said Washington. Kia. "Shut up, Cecilia," Rachel screeched, lunging forward to tackle her. Cecilia, predictably, didn't resist, probably because she found the whole thing far too amusing. Rachel clamped a hand over Cecilia's mouth, her golden mana flickering faintly as if it, too, shared her indignation. Rachel turned her head toward me, cheeks blazing as her sapphire eyes narrowed. It was the kind of look that said, "Don't ask, just don't." I'm curious, I thought, but also terrified. Whatever Cecilia had done or said was clearly something that lived rent-free in Rachel's nightmares. And based on Rachel's reaction, I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Want to team up then?" I asked, deciding that steering the conversation into safer waters was probably the wisest course of action. The two of them stilled, Rachel slowly removing her hand from Cecilia's face, though her glare remained firmly in place. They considered my suggestion for a moment before nodding. "Fine by me," Cecilia said, stretching her arms over her head like this was some casual weekend hike and not a battlefield. "Strength in numbers and all that." "Agreed," Rachel said, her tone clipped, though she clearly wasn't about to let Cecilia off the hook for whatever crime she had committed, but only because it's practical. "Okay," Cecilia said with a smirk. "So how many points do you have, Arthur?" 6,000, I replied. Cecilia's eyebrows shot up. "Damn. Well done, Arthur," she said, grinning. "I've only got 1,500 because Ray decided to hunt me down the moment this whole thing started." Rachel, ignoring the nickname entirely, spoke without missing a beat. "I have 1,650. Her tone was calm, but her pointed look at Cecilia carried a very clear message. "I'm better." Cecilia shrugged again, looking entirely too pleased with herself. "What can I say? Chaos loves me." "More like chaos follows you," Rachel muttered, crossing her arms. "Semantics," Cecilia replied breezily. I sighed, glancing between them. Teaming up was starting to feel less like a strategy and more like babysitting to particularly powerful children on the verge of a sugar-induced meltdown. But, well, strength in numbers and all that. "Anyway, who did you manage to eliminate?" Cecilia asked as the three of us began walking, her tone casual, as though we weren't in the middle of a battlefield masquerading as a test. "Ren and Clara Lopez," I replied. "Oh, you took down Ren?" Rachel said, her voice tinged with surprise. "That's very impressive." It was, but it had also been far too close for comfort. Ren underestimated me, which is why my God Flash worked. His God's eyes hadn't been fully activated, likely because he didn't consider me a real threat. In a proper match, one where he actually tried from the beginning, I'd lose. No doubt about it. I simply didn't have the tools or the power yet to beat someone like Ren Kabu. "And Clara Lopez," Cecilia hummed thoughtfully, her crimson eyes narrowing in that annoyingly knowing way of hers. "She's going to join class the next semester, 9th seat." I nodded. It made sense. With her higher mono rank and absurd multi-element casting ability, Clara was easily on par with the rest of Class A. She'd probably belong there even more than I did, though I wasn't about to say that out loud. Rachel frowned slightly, her sapphire eyes flicking to Cecilia. "How do you have so much insider information? I mean, you got the midterms half right since you mixed them up with the first practical evaluation, but still." "Intelligence, darling," Cecilia said, tapping her temple with a theatrical flourish. "And maybe a little bit of charm," she smirked, "like when I called you." "Oh, shut up," Rachel shrieked, her cheeks turning crimson as she lunged at Cecilia, who dodged gracefully, looking utterly unbothered. Cecilia could tease Rachel about this forever. I thought, watching the scene play out with a mixture of amusement and mild exasperation. "Come on, Ray," Cecilia said, still grinning. It was cute. "You should own it." "No," Rachel yelled, her voice rising another octave. "Just shut up." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Both of you, stop bickering. We need to focus on getting to the neutral zone." Cecilia waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, there's nothing to worrying about now, is there? I mean, after all." She stopped mid-sentence. The air around us shifted, sharp and heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. Luna's sigils flared to life on my arms, glowing faintly as my silver mana surged. Instinctively, I stepped in front of the girls, raising my arms defensively. A bead of sweat slid down my cheek. Danger! Arthur, Luna's voice whispered in my mind, urgent. I know, I replied, my senses screaming as the presence grew stronger. And then the voice came. Smooth, melodic, and chilling all at once. Well, I didn't expect a mere human to sense me. Impressive. The being stepped out from the shadows, her movements unnervingly graceful. My blood ran cold as Rachel audibly gasped, her wings flickering with golden mana. Cecilia, for once, didn't have a single teasing word to say. Her crimson mana flared instinctively, but her expression was one of utter disbelief. Impossible, Cecilia whispered, her usual confidence reduced to a shaky breath. She wasn't wrong. This shouldn't have been possible. It was inconceivable, and yet the evidence stood before us, impossible to deny. A demon. Tall, with sleek horns curling elegantly from her head and eyes like pools of molten fire, the creature radiated a presence that felt like oil slicking over my skin thick. Invasive, wrong. Her dark aura shimmered faintly, as if reality itself struggled to accommodate its existence. Demons hadn't stepped foot on Earth in over 1,000 years. Their presence was forbidden, their kind banished. And yet, here she stood, watching us with a cruel smile that didn't quite reach her burning eyes. Well, she purred, her voice laced with something dangerously close to amusement. Isn't this a delightful little group? A saintess, a slate mark, and... She turned her gaze to me, tilting her head slightly. You. Curious, very curious. I clenched my jaw, gripping my sword so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. This wasn't like facing Ren or Clara. This was different. This was overwhelming. The demon's gaze swept over Rachel and Cecilia, lingering just long enough to make my stomach twist. How fascinating, she murmured, almost to herself. Chapter 80, Deviation 1. The miasmic species creatures from other dimensions were an ever-present threat to Earth. Each continent had its own particular brand of nightmare to deal with. In the north, the Shadow Seekers roamed, ethereal and relentless. To the west, ogres and orcs waged their brutal campaigns, their sheer physicality a constant challenge. In the south, the dark beasts prowled, their monstrous forms as dangerous as their cunning minds. The east had faced its own scourge in the past, vampires. Nearly 2 centuries ago, they were driven to the brink of extinction by Liamkadu, the first hero. His efforts were so thorough that most people believed the vampires were gone entirely, but I knew better. Beneath the surface, in an underground city far from the eyes of the living, the vampires lurked, rebuilding in the shadows. Yet out of all the miasmic species, one stood apart, not just in strength, but in purpose. They weren't here because of natural migration or desperation. No, their presence on Earth was by design. A calculated, cold invasion. Demons. Where other species clung to survival, demons sought dominion. They didn't come to coexist, didn't even pretend to want peace. They came to conquer. Interplanetary, interdimensional conquerors with a terrifying knack for dominating every other species they encountered. And they were good at it. The novel I'd read before, well, finding myself here hadn't gone into too much detail about demons. Lucifer, the protagonist, had limited contact with them up to the point I'd read. But I remembered enough to know this was bad, very bad. Demons were unique among the miasmic species. At birth, each was assigned to one of the 7 deadly sins. That wasn't just a fancy naming convention, either it dictated their very being. Each sign came with a corresponding gift, a manifestation of power tied to their nature. The demon in front of us. Lust, a succubus, to be exact. Luna's voice cut through my thoughts. Calm and clinical, a demon baron, she informed me. Her tone made it sound like she was discussing the weather, but my stomach dropped all the same. A demon baron, equivalent to a white ranker in the human system. Which would have been bad enough, but demons didn't play by human rules. Their progression system was different, rooted in miasma rather than mana. But at every stage of their growth, they were inherently superior to humans of the same rank. Just as humans could outmatch beasts of the same mana level through intelligence and technique, demons outclassed humans in almost every meaningful way. This succubus, she could contend with Lucifer himself. She'd lose. Eventually, his yin-yang body and sheer power would see to that, but the fact that she could even push him to his limits was a testament to the gulf between demons and humans. And here she was, standing in front of us, her every movement languid and predatory. The air around her shimmered faintly with miasma, thick and oppressive, making it hard to breathe. Her eyes, a shade of violet that seemed to pull you in, fixed on me with an amused glint. She smiled a slow, deliberate expression that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. "Well, aren't you three interesting?" she purred, her voice smooth and melodic, each word laced with something that felt dangerous, wrong, a saintess, a slate mark, and whatever you are. Her gaze lingered on me, and I gripped my sword tighter, trying to will my legs not to shake. I could feel the weight of her presence pressing down on me, as though she was trying to peel back my skin and peer into my soul. This was no ordinary opponent. She wasn't here to play games. She was here because she wanted to be, and that made her all the more terrifying. A slate mark, I thought grimly, the weight of history pressing down on my shoulders. The demons had left Earth long ago, driven back by none other than Julius Slatemark, the man who had forged the Slatemark Empire from blood and defiance. Julius, Luna's first contractor, had met his end at the hands of the demons at least. That's what the records claimed. Whether or not those records told the whole truth didn't matter right now. What did matter was that demons hated the Slatemarks with a vengeance, and the Slatemarks hated them right back. Their mutual animosity ran deep, and if the novel was anything to go by, the first place the demons would attack when they returned would be the Slatemark Empire. "Ratch," I said, my voice low but urgent, as I felt her hand touch my back. A wave of energy coursed through me, Rachel's golden mana infusing my body with renewed strength. My wounds knitted themselves together, the ache in my limbs fading like a bad memory. Luckily, neither Cecilia nor I pushed ourselves too much, Rachel said, though her breathing was growing heavier with each passing second. Healing wasn't effortless, even for her. "Why the hell is a demon here?" Cecilia hissed. All traces of her usual playful demeanor burned away, replaced by cold, focused anger. Demons, the most reviled enemies of humanity. Hated, feared, and yet forgotten by most thanks to their centuries-long absence. They'd played a significant, albeit indirect, role in the Eastern continent's struggles nearly 200 years ago, a role that Liam Kagu had brought to an abrupt and bloody end. But they were considered relics of the past now, irrelevant to the present day. Until now. "The Academy's not responding," Rachel said, her voice steady but strained. Her wings flickered faintly, a sign of her mana expenditure. I nodded grimly. Demons weren't just stronger, they were smarter, too. Blocking our communication was child's play for them, and it was no surprise that the Academy's tech had been rendered useless. "Well, cuties," the succubus purred, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. She leaned forward slightly, her violet eyes gleaming as she touched her lips with a finger. "My name is Vespera. How about you come kiss me?" Her words hit like a hammer to the chest. Heat flooded my face, my mind spinning as her voice echoed in my head. My heart pounded in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Arthur," Cecilia said sharply, her hand gripping my shoulder and pulling me back to reality. The grounding touch, combined with her firm tone, snapped me out of the succubus's spell. I thought my mental defenses were solid. I thought, shaking my head as the haze cleared. But Vespera's power wasn't just an illusion or a suggestion, it was something far more invasive. Something that dug under your skin and made you question your own will. Overpowered was an understatement. Of course, as a succubus, Her power naturally targeted me, a male, far more effectively than it would the two very unimpressed straight women behind me. Vespera pouted, her expression a masterwork of mock disappointment. Looks like I'll have to try a little harder. Whatever she planned to do next, she didn't get the chance. Crimson and golden arrows streaked through the air toward her. A barrage of mana-infused power launched from behind me. Vespera's eyes gleamed with delight as miasma poured out of her, thick and dark as spilled ink. The arrows were shredded mid-flight, cleaved apart like paper in a storm. Not a single one made it through. 4 circle spells, Cecilia muttered, clicking her tongue in frustration. And she just shredded them like nothing. The succubus smiled lazily, tilting her head. Is that all, darlings? I expected more from the saintess and a slate-marked princess. Relax, I told myself, my grip tightening on my sword. My mana flared to life as I stepped forward, silver light flickering around me. I couldn't afford to hesitate, not now. This wasn't just a battle. This was survival.